You're hiking in the wilderness, looking for a safe spot to set up camp. All you can hear are leaves and branches cracking under your footsteps. Some squirrels are running up a tree over there. But suddenly, something unexpected happens. You notice something weird in the distance in between the trees. It kind of looks like a concrete structure of some sort. Weird. At this point, you're at least 20 miles deep in the woods and there are no nearby towns or villages, as far as you know. So you decide to go off the trail with your friends to get a closer look. But as you get nearer, you realize that it's actually a 12-foot tall staircase and it's leading to nowhere. What's it doing there in the middle of literally nowhere? And it doesn't even lead to anything. You put on your Sherlock Holmes cap and investigate. So maybe there used to be an old house or mansion here that collapsed over the years and the only thing left is this staircase. But weirdly enough, after circling the bizarre structure, you realize there's no trace of any ruins or even foundations. It's like someone just sliced a staircase off their house, cake style, and plopped it here for no reason. Okay. You and your friends aren't really into getting a whole lot closer. Something feels wrong. The longer you look at this weird structure, the more you feel a super creepy presence. Something tells you you should probably leave the area as fast as possible. You can't explain the feeling or take your eyes off the creepy staircase. You take out your phone and snap some pictures. Then, after a lot of hesitation, you take a few steps closer and notice that the stairs don't seem to be all that ancient, a few decades old at best. There's moss growing out from some cracks. Your friends have had enough. They ditch you and run back off to the trail, leaving you alone on the staircase. You put your foot carefully on the first step. Wham! Adrenaline rush. As you ascend to the top, someone touches your shoulder. You jump and turn around. All you see is black. As weird as this sounds, discoveries of random staircases illogically found in the woods are surprisingly common. Some are made of wood, others are bricks or stones. Some look ancient, while others look like they were finished yesterday. The one thing they all have in common, they all lead to absolutely nowhere, and they're all found in super mysterious locations. One of the most famous ones is in Chesterfield, New Hampshire, a long medieval-looking staircase made of stones with Roman arches in the middle of the woods. It's believed to have been part of Madame Antoinette Sherry's castle. She was a big singer back in Paris. The castle dates back about 100 years, and it was later discovered again in 1962. This time, there was nothing but a staircase. Another mysterious ancient staircase dates back to 9,000 years ago. It's in a forest in Italy. It looks like a series of stairs that led to a tiny platform at the top. Why go through all the trouble of building the thing if it leads to nowhere? Well, some experts think it could have been some sort of ritual tower, but your guess is as good as theirs. Some of the more modern staircases found in the woods also have an added bonus. They come with their own urban legends. Gee, would that be a 2-story or 3-story staircase? One of the most popular stories comes from the Philippines, where a forest ranger called Torkik allegedly went out on one of his routine patrols to look for missing people deep in the local jungle. That's where he claims he found some seriously out-of-place stone staircases. They even had weird markings on them. To get a better look at what was around him, he decided to climb up one of them. Just then, he was approached by a vicious stray dog that forced him further up the stairs. A few hours later, he came back to the village. Only thing was, he had been missing for 5 years. Was that staircase a time-traveling portal? Another account allegedly dates back to the 1940s, around the time of the Roswell UFO mystery. A man who claimed to be a scientist was sent to assist in investigating one of the many animal-related cases that kept popping up. Little did he know, this 1 to 2 week investigation would end up lasting 6 months. His team encountered a random wooden staircase in the woods that seemed to emit some type of frequency. They camped around 100 feet from it that night, but the next morning, it vanished. All that was left was a black burn mark where the staircase was. 2 days later, it reappeared out of nowhere, 160 feet from its original location. The team wanted to get a sample of the wood to send it off to the lab. There was one problem. No matter how hard they tried, it was impossible to chip off a piece. The wood from the staircase was apparently indestructible. These weird mystery stairs have been around since ancient Cambodia. Right in the middle of the jungle is an abandoned 2,000-foot-long staircase leading to, nowhere. According to experts, this staircase was built about 1,000 years ago. They don't know for sure, but they think it led to an ancient city. Sadly, over the years, that city is now completely covered by the dense jungle. Maybe it was an important meeting spot for travelers and merchants coming from all over the continent. Well, back to your story. You feel a strange presence behind you. You turn around, probably one of your friends snuck up on you or something. But then you realize there was no one behind you. You're the only one around. You freak out. Something is definitely wrong here. So you rush down the stairs and bolt back to your friends, panting and startled. You start to tell your friends what happened, but they don't believe you. They think you're just trying to scare them even more. But the emotion on your face, it looks legit. There's real panic in your eyes, the kind you just can't fake. Shadow or wind or whatever that thing was, your fear's real. You all agree that you should stay away from the stairs, and it's probably best if you go back home, right now. I guess camping out there overnight just wasn't meant to be. As soon as you get home, you open your phone and check out your gallery. But no, you scroll through photo after photo. The staircase, it isn't there. None of the pictures have any staircases in them. Just a small, flat clearing with nothing but trees around, no weird shadows, nothing. Your friends have the same experience. Your eye twitches and you look over your left shoulder. You're in the safety of your own home, but you suddenly feel the same presence you felt on that staircase. Oh no! Everything goes black. But you can relax. Most of these stories are just urban legends, told to give you the heebie-jeebies. The internet has a way of spreading rumors faster than the speed of light. Most of these stairs might have even been built on purpose just recently. One weekend woodshop project, a couple of photos, and you too could be a sensation on every urban legend website. Then you just tear it down, take a photo to show it magically disappeared, and just like that, you're an internet superstar. But let's say you find some real stairs on your weekend camping trip. They're most likely the remnants from an old house or a cabin that got demolished or just collapsed after it was abandoned. Hey, it's 2021. There's a logical explanation for just about everything these days. That presence you felt was most likely your own mind playing tricks on you. When you see something in real life that looks like something you saw on a website or a scary movie, your mind starts to work overtime, and you can actually see something or feel something that's not even there. That's what some people say happens when you get hypnotized. You want to see something so bad, and you do. That's probably what happened. Or was it?
Shh! Do you hear something? It's nothing. Just water dripping. You're walking alone down a dark corridor with nothing but your phone lighting your way. You see a large figure at the end of the hallway. You can't make out what it is, but it's a large figure with broad shoulders and a lab coat. You pause and have nowhere to go but forward towards the figure or back to the staircase. Suddenly, the figure starts sprinting towards you. You freeze in your spot. 4 hours earlier. You and your two friends decided to sneak into an abandoned chemical plant to film some cool videos for social media. You were against the idea because it's creepy, but your friends insist that it will get many views and go viral. So you grab your bikes, flashlights, and some self-defensive gear and make your way there. It's nightfall, so you hook up your bike's flashlights and pedal off. After a couple of miles, you divert onto an off-road path through a thick forest until you reach a large steel fence encircling the plant. You and your friends have been here before, but you never went past the fence. Despite all the warning signs, you get out your pliers and start cutting the fence. The legend is that this plant was abandoned decades ago after operating at full capacity. Then, one day, an accident occurred, leading to a massive evacuation from the plant and the city around it. Ever since then, the plant was emptied. No health hazards are going on, but people who live in the town nearby have reported seeing things. Figures were moving in the shadows. Random lights flicker in the plant, even though no one is there. There have been reports of loud screams in the middle of the night. After hearing these stories, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and you shudder with fear. Your friends, on the other hand, are giddy and excited. After cutting through the fence, you leave your bikes and make your way to the plant. You pass the parking lot with some cars parked in their designated place. Other cars look like they were abandoned, with the doors still open. You reach the entrance of the plant, but it's chained up. Your friends rattle it, but it won't budge. Well, I guess the adventure is over. But your friend takes a rock and smashes it through a window, and you and your friends climb through. You enter the plant, and it's pitch black. The floor is sticky, and the air is dusty. You whip out your flashlights and light up the room. It's covered in black material that's hard to distinguish. Some objects are tossed over, as if people were just trying to make it to the exit. So far, nothing seems that creepy. The plant is huge, so there'll be plenty of time to explore. Your friend gets out her phone and starts filming live on social media. She's narrating the whole trip, and many people are viewing it. They're commenting and sharing their thoughts. Suddenly, you hear a scream coming from deep within the building. You and your friends hug each other in fear and almost run out. But your friend recording what's happening insists you move forward. The path is long and confusing. You find a map of the plant that tells you where to go. You see that you're only in the reception lobby, and there are still plenty of places to go. The flickering lights come from the second floor in a room facing the town, which is not too far from where you're at. You move upstairs in a very slow attempt, but the stairs are unstable. After a few steps up, one of the stairs breaks, and your leg is caught up at the bottom, where you almost fall. Your friends help you up. You reach the second floor and try to find the room with the flickering lights. The only problem is that the lights go off randomly. Or maybe it's not so random. You decide to split up to cover more ground. Good thing you have walkie-talkies to communicate, but it's still creepy. You tiptoe into each room. The displaced objects you see show how the people just packed up and ran away. Each room is creepier than the next. You point your flashlight all over, trying to find some clues to anything that might explain anything. You get some static from your walkie-talkie, and it gets louder and louder. You can't turn it off. Then you hear some voice behind the static crackling noise. It doesn't sound like any of your friends. It says, in a high-pitched shriek. You almost drop your walkie-talkie, and then the lights in the room you're standing in start to flicker. You freak out and run outside to your friends. You bump into many objects and knock them down. Your friends rush to you to see what's happening. You explain everything to them, and they head to the room to see if it all makes sense. But they don't spot anything weird. The lights are not flickering, and the walkie-talkies are silent. Are you just imagining it? Your friend is still filming everything live. There are even more people hopping on the live stream. You don't want to waste any more time, so you and your friends go deeper into the plant. This time it's completely pitch black, since there aren't any windows around. It's creepy. You see some lab coats scattered across the floor, resembling people. There are rooms on each side of the wall with machines and gizmos. Most of the rooms are locked and need a passcode to enter. The only problem is that the power's out. The batteries of your flashlight begin to give out, so you switch to lights on your phones. Your friend is still filming live, but as you go deeper, the signal cuts out. Even walkie-talkies don't work. It's very damp, and the room is echoing with creepy sounds. Each step resonates around the extended hallway, making it sound like someone is stalking you. That's when you hear footsteps coming from one of the rooms. The legend says that there's a creature living here with extended arms, sharp teeth, and glowing red eyes. It wanders around the corridors, scratching the walls with its sharp claws. Some say it's lost and has been trying to find a way out, while others say it's a dog that found its way inside. Your friend records everything on her phone without going live to upload the footage later. Suddenly, you hear something you don't ever want to hear, scratching on the wall. You and your friends look at each other with your eyes popping out and run. You're again knocking over things and making a lot of noise. You reach a dead end. We're at the spot. You see the large figure with broad shoulders and what appears to be a lab coat. It starts racing towards you. You try all the doors in the hallway, and finally, one of them opens. You go inside and slam the door shut. The creature starts slamming on the door, trying to get in. You're recording this on your phone. You crawl to a glass window to see what it is, but you only get a glimpse of the creature fleeing. You lost your friends and your way. You want to get out of here. A map of the plant inside the room shows you the way out. You check to see if it's clear, and you head out. You take a picture of the map to see where to go, but you're going around in circles. You hear your friends outside and rush to them. They were trying to call you, but lost you when they scattered. You leave the plant, get on your bikes, and head back home. As you reach the main road outside the forest, you turn around to see if anything weird is happening at the plant. You see the lights flicker in the same room you were in. You shudder and go home. Don't worry, none of it was real. The lights flickering were just the battery-powered lamps randomly going off, and the creature that was supposedly chasing you was your friends pulling a prank on you. There's no creature there, and the other sounds you heard are some stray animals scared of all the commotion. The video got a lot of views and went viral on social media. However, someone pointed out a figure in the glass reflection during the live stream. What could it be?
When you think of theme parks, you normally imagine laughter and fun times. But once they're closed and abandoned, now that's a whole different story. Let's take a look at some of them. You decide to take a trip to New Orleans to visit Six Flags. When you arrive there, you discover the theme park is deserted. The sign that says "Closed for Storm" is still standing. You're feeling adventurous, so you let yourself pass the crackling gates. Is it chilly in here, or is it just me? You walk past a swimming pool, and it looks like there's someone in there. You get closer and, oh no, it's an alligator. Better run and leave that thing alone. You keep exploring the site. The park took inspiration from the city's French architecture, but today the buildings are dirty, the windows are all shattered, and there are unusual items everywhere. Say, what is this vintage rollerblade doing here? The park closed during the hurricane, and it was left standing under 7 feet of water. No wonder the metal rides are all rusty now. This carousel doesn't look too inviting to me. We'll have to come back another time. Hey, at least you got some cool-looking pictures, right? Let's make this next one even more exciting. Imagine you plan to visit Dada Park at night. Somewhere in the countryside of Belgium, you'll find a creepy theme park derelict from many years ago. You have nothing with you but the floodlight on your phone. You see the entrance of a bridge and start to make your way across. The bridge sways and creaks. Just FYI, you are crossing one of the longest hanging bridges in Europe. You made it through. Whew. The surrounding woods are terrifying, and several deserted attractions start popping up along the way. The forest has taken this twirling swing set. This huge slide would probably break if you tried to use it now. The park is in terrible condition. No wonder they closed it down due to security reasons. Best to leave it now and come back in the daylight. Your next stop is Wonderland Eurasia, also known as Anka Park in Turkey. The theme park opened in March 2019 but closed shortly after. Once inside the gigantic complex, you stumble upon what looks like an empty warehouse but ends up being an indoor roller coaster. Everything was left intact and is as good as new. You even take a quick sit on one of the roller coaster carts, perfectly lined up for the next ride. If you're feeling really adventurous, you can walk on the rails of the indoor coaster. Just be careful not to fall down. Oh, over there are the Flintstones. It's almost like a childhood deja vu here in the youngsters section of the park. On the horizon, you see what looks like the Jurassic World and decide to check it out. There are neglected statues of huge T-Rexes and fake skeletons of dinosaurs lying across the floor. Unlike the other derelict parks, everything here is new, which makes it all the more strange. Nara Dreamland was meant to be Japan's Disney World, but the project failed over time. Today, it's inhabited by moist ivies and strange birds. To get in, you'll pass a drawbridge and head into a pastel-colored castle. Your heart might beat faster than usual when you pass a fog-covered roller coaster. Was that meant to be the Matterhorn? Yup. Everything about this place says you shouldn't be there. Tossed on the park's floor, you'll see reels of tickets and misconfigured stuffed animals. How about walking into an empty diner? It's bizarre how the tables and stools are still in place. Strolling through what was once a gift shop, you'll see empty shelves and an old-school cash machine. I'd say you better leave before anything comes out of here. Now, if I say Joyland, what do you imagine? The name says it all, right? But if you decide to visit Joyland today, I bet you'll have a very chilling time. Down in Wichita, Kansas, you'll find a once famous but now empty theme park filled with eerie sights. A pale blue slide in the middle of a forest? Check. Empty warehouses straight out of a horror movie? Check. A wacky shack that looks truly wacky? You bet. But if you visit it on a good sunny day, I'd say the park is weird but still has some beauty. Joyland was built in the late 1940s. It carries a vintage aura that goes well with the neglected atmosphere. Hey, look at this rusty yellow Ferris wheel with a stripped ticket box in front. I dare say it's almost charming. The Magic Harbor Amusement Park is not that magical after all. Just outside of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you'll find an old theme park left to nature. Here, bumper cars are not bumping anymore. If you get into a hedge maze, you'll probably never find your way out of it. I'm not sure what you'll see running around amongst the rusty rides, so good luck if you're planning a visit. If you're looking for somewhere to cool down on a hot and sunny afternoon, how about Disney's River Country? Just kidding. You're definitely not going to want to get in the water there. The park was built in the 1970s and closed in 2001. Pay a visit to the Whitewater Rapids on foot instead of floating down the fake river. You'll have about 330 feet to stroll along a very bumpy pathway. Maybe you'll see hanging tires that served as swing sets out in the bay. You can even try zip lining if you trust the cable. To add a little more creepy to this story, the park was closed down due to a dangerous bacteria that thrived in warm bodies of water. Are you sure you don't fancy a swim? When you think Italy, I bet you think pasta and pizza, and a leaning tower somewhere. Well, in the south of Italy sits the empty Miragica amusement park. The entrance still says welcome, but people stopped coming a few years ago. The site is covered in grass everywhere. The toy-like architecture is still there. Beneath the forgotten rails of an open-air roller coaster, you can almost hear the screams of excitement of people on the ride. This part of the park is usually prohibited, but there's no one around to control that now. It might be scary to be here, but adrenaline sure is running high. This next theme park is vacant only during a certain time of the year, but it still gives the true heebie-jeebie vibes. You have to catch a train from the city and travel to the end of the line till you reach the park. Coney Island is a seasonal park, open only from the middle of spring to the middle of fall. If you want to catch its unnerving vibe, you have to visit in winter. Then, you'd walk through the rows of empty stalls with the fairy string lights still hanging above your head. It looks frozen in time as all the rides lay shut down. Speaking of which, Sometimes it gets frozen for real. Under many inches of snow, Coney Island is a little less disturbing. Then again, snow does have that effect on landscapes, but the park is empty and deserted nonetheless. I bet it's a great photo op. Now, be sure to tell me in the comments which abandoned amusement park you found the creepiest. Hey, you know me, I won't be checking any of these out. I'll let you go first.
Are you afraid of the dark? There are some places where you don't want to be in. Deep inside the mines is already scary, but it's the stories behind it that make my skin crawl. The Ringwood Mine in New Jersey might sound like a typical mine for some people, but for others, it's a place that no one wants to go. It was once a thriving mine with one of the largest iron productions in the world. More than 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, people abandoned the mine and it's still open for curious tourists to take a peek. During its heyday, thousands of workers would get up every day and prepare themselves to work in very dangerous conditions. The mine was prone to cave-ins and various accidents that happened regularly. People were getting underpaid even though they knew how dangerous it was to be there. Think less than a single dollar per day to get dirty and without sunlight for most of your day. But that's not the reason why people nowadays avoid it. It's because there were reports of paranormal activity down there. Some of the locals claimed they heard footsteps and voices originating from inside the mines years before it was abandoned. Some people saw figures walking around their homes while holding lanterns in their hands, something which was very common back in those days. Although people have claimed to hear these strange noises, there's no evidence to suggest that it was anything paranormal. Back in those days, between the 1800s and the early 1900s, there weren't any proper treatments or precautions for safety and health. People needed to work, and this was a quick way of earning money. No one ever thought about being down a mining shaft was scary or not. Imagine you're one of those workers who are about to finish your shift when the lantern above you starts to die out. You get some matches and try to ignite them, but no luck. After a while, you realize that it's just you down there, and everyone else has left. You pack up your gear and make your way out following the string of lights that were placed strategically so that no one gets lost down there. As you make your way through the narrow path, you start hearing voices coming from behind the walls. At first, you don't think much of it considering the reverberation of sounds within the mines. But then, you listen closely and realize that these sounds seem like they're literally coming from within the walls that are too thick to be heard from outside. You glue your ear to the walls and hear someone call your name. You jolt and run towards the mouth of the cave. However, the lights are flickering and the voices are getting louder and louder. The voices are jumbling together, creating an incoherent mix of weird gibberish and what appears to sound like someone chanting your name. Your heart is racing and you're sweating profusely. You don't really know where you're going since everything looks the same. Suddenly, you hear the sound of rumbling coming from the belly of the mine, and then silence. Everything is black. That's what it would feel like if you were a miner during those days. Back to the creepy stories. In West Riding, England, the name Oak's Pit strikes fear into the local community. The people of Barnsley remember that the mining site was one of the mining disasters in British history on December 12, 1866. The gases inside the mines ignited a fire, causing a major explosion. The fire spread and raged on for many days, destroying the mining equipment and wooden supports that were built. Finally, around 100 tons of coal collapsed into a crater at the mouth of the shaft, sealing it for good. However, very recently, people began to notice something strange. Quite recently, a team specialized in otherworldly phenomena decided to investigate the site to try and figure out what happened there. They got around to see if there was anything left that they could communicate with. In the end, the team concluded that this place was indeed freaky. There wasn't enough evidence to prove that the place was haunted. During the early 1900s, there was a silver rush in Alaska in the western part of the Wrangell Mountains. The Tonopah Mining District, which is now a museum, was part of a park that hosted plenty of buildings, such as a blacksmith shop and a hospital, among others. While there isn't any particular story like the previous ones, this mine is known to be haunted. There are plenty of theories behind it. Some say it's ancient spirits occupying the mines, while others say it's from the prospectors who used to work there. Either way, you can easily get a guided tour in and around the area, even at night if you're brave enough to go. Mining has always been a part of human history. The first metals to have ever been mined were gold and copper. Some scientists have found evidence of copper pipes to be more than 5,000 years old. Copper was necessary for the next stage of human advancement, as it helped us with technology for defending ourselves and trading. Ever heard of the term luck of the Irish? That's actually a mining term during the gold and silver rushes in Western America, when most of the luck was going to the Irish miners who were finding everything. In 1863, the Vulture mine in Arizona was thriving with gold, as if the name of the mine wasn't creepy enough. Up until 1946, it was producing millions of ores of gold, but in between, the mine closed for certain times. Many investigators decided to look around the mine to see if there was anything strange happening inside. According to them, they heard some noise coming from above when they were inside. The locals of the area later chased them out since they were trespassing. The Atlas coal mine opened and closed quickly between 1936 and 1979 in Alberta, Canada. The coal was mined to produce electricity and heating. The mine was known for having 2 shafts, both of which were connected by a tunnel at its base. The owners of the mines decided to build houses for their workers and their families, since they knew they were creating many jobs. They eventually built a school, a hospital, and a library. But in 1979, the mine closed due to an accident, and ever since then, the mining town was abandoned. Many people have reported seeing some lights inside the buildings, despite them being empty, as well as hearing weird noises from within the walls. Some remarkable things were discovered in mines, including the mighty Titan boa. This giant serpent was slithering around roughly 58 million years ago and was more than 40 feet in length, and weighed as much as a black rhino today. The coal miners in Colombia were digging out some coal when they discovered the fossil of this giant snake. Initially, they thought it was an anaconda, but it was much bigger than that. Imagine making that discovery. Now, imagine roaming through a mine and discovering antique European cars dating back to the 1930s. In 2016, a Belgian teacher was going through a French mine when he discovered the tunnels which led to the cars. It's believed that they were kept there as a secret stash, but no one claimed them back. Even though they're all rusty, their value certainly didn't drop. If you ever wanted to visit the world's largest freshwater dive resort, then we have the Bonne Terre in a lead mine in Missouri to thank for that. It was a fully functioning mine up until 1962 when it shut down. The company that was operating it pulled the plug, including the water pumps. Slowly, but surely, water began to rise and fill the mine, and by the 1970s, the 3 lowest levels were completely submerged. It then became known as the world's largest underground freshwater lake, and was named the Billion-Gallon Lake. Most of the mining equipment is still underwater, and there are dozens of miles to discover. Count me in.
They used to call this island the Paris of the East, mostly because it had beautiful buildings with large gardens and impressive stone archways. But now, it's nothing like it used to be, with all the architecture almost entirely covered in tree roots and vines. Ross Island is a small territory in the Indian Ocean. It's located east of the Indian city of Port Blair. Though initially thought of as a jail, Ross Island eventually became a luxurious resort for the local administrators. They called this island a real treat for its more privileged residents. It boasted opulent bungalows, stained glass window panels brought all the way from Italy, neatly kept gardens, tennis courts, and even swimming pools. Soon after the complex was closed in 1937, A powerful earthquake hit the island. It caused a lot of damage, making it even more uninhabitable. The island is now in the administration of India and has become a tourist attraction for people interested in abandoned towns. Pieces of German architecture still lie hidden in the Namibian desert. The city of Kolmanskop, Namibia, was a luxury location at its peak in the early 1900s when German workers settled here looking for diamonds. This abandoned town used to have everything from a ballroom to a hospital and even a bowling alley. It all started to decline somewhere in the late 1910s when another diamond-packed location was found nearby. So, most of the people living here moved, leaving everything behind in search of more money. Kolmanskop has since been slowly occupied by sand dunes, while the hot temperature and low moisture help to preserve the buildings. This ghost town is also available for visitors. If it sounds interesting, you can book a tour in the nearby town of Lüderitz. Another abandoned castle dominates the view in Krakow, a city in Italy. The whole village sits atop a cliff that's 1,312 feet high. The founders liked this location since they knew it would be easy to defend themselves from unwanted guests. But the castle, built in the 1300s, soon became overwhelmed by landslides and earthquakes. Even though it has no residents anymore, the medieval city often comes alive during the various local festivals that take place here in the summer months. The locals also offer tours and tell amazing stories about the location. One of the highlights of the tour is a statue that seemingly came out of nowhere and now lies in a body of water. Hidden away in the Montana mountains, Garnet Ghost Town tells the well-known American story of the West's gold rush. The town's history goes back to the 1890s when they found a lot of gold in the Nancy Hanks mine. During its glory days, Garnet had almost 1,000 residents. Even though it's in a relatively secluded location, it had saloons, hotels, stores, a school, and other features of a regular little town. In 1905, when most of the gold had already been taken away, most mines were left behind, so only a couple of hundred residents stayed in Garnet. The final straw came in 1912, when a fire damaged most of the town's buildings. So, by the 1940s, Garnet was completely abandoned. It soon became a hotspot for treasure hunters looking for furnishings and artifacts. That was until a preservation campaign started in the 1970s. It ended with the town being declared a historic district in 2010. To this day, Garnet is one of the best preserved ghost towns in the area. Hashima Island is another abandoned location that tells us that when people leave, nature takes over. This mysterious place was even featured in a James Bond movie because of its ghostly landscape. It used to be a well-known spot in Japan for undersea coal mines, as it was opened in 1881. In 1959, at its peak, there were over 5,000 people living here, including mine workers and their families. As soon as the mines started going dry, sometime in 1970, people started to slowly depart the island, leaving it completely abandoned in 3 months. Even though nobody lives there these days, there are a lot of tourists here that drop off to wander around the abandoned homes, swimming pools, stores, and factories. Another town that started with a mining company back in 1881 is Calico, California. People discovered the location was packed with silver, so it soon became home to over 500 silver mines and 3,000 residents. It used to feature hotels, general stores, restaurants, and a school. There was even a local newspaper printed here called the Calico Print. But by 1986, the town had become empty. One of the former locals decided to buy it and began its restoration, making it a registered historical landmark. It even has a museum of the Old West available for tourists. One of the most interesting attractions that were rebuilt is the 1-mile-long Calico and Odessa Railroad. It currently goes through the steep canyons and hills, and even passes the old mines and buildings north of Calico. Approximately 1/3 of the town is original, while the rest consists of newer buildings that are replicas meant to recreate the spirit of its past. If you're a fan of cars, you might have heard of Henry Ford as the famous American industrialist who founded the Ford Motor Company in 1903. But in 1927, he began working on another one of his ambitious dreams, Fordlandia. It was supposed to be a massive rubber plantation located near the Tapajos River in Brazil, since he needed a reliable source of rubber for his car tires and hoses. His vision was to design a town complete with swimming pools, a golf course, living bungalows, and even weekly square dancing sessions for the locals. This project was unfortunate to begin with, since the local rubber trees soon got infected with leaf fungus. Even though Henry Ford invested a staggering $20 million into this potential income source, the town failed to produce the needed rubber. He had nothing left to do but to sell it to Brazil in 1945, and soon it was completely abandoned. Many of its buildings are still standing, but have been taken over by the surrounding nature. You can still see curious tourists wandering through it to this day. During its glory days, Hampi was the second largest city in the world. Looking at its ruins today, it's hard to imagine this Indian city used to be filled with temples and bazaars, and that it served as an important center of the Mauryan Empire in the 14th and 15th centuries. It was destroyed in the 16th century, but it still has beautifully preserved forts and markets. It became part of the UNESCO World Heritage in 1986, aiming to protect its buildings, such as the Lotus Mahal, a stone structure that was carved to resemble a lotus flower opening to the sun. A tourist village was constructed back in 1920 along the shore of Epicuén, a salt lake about 370 miles southwest of Buenos Aires in Argentina. It was designed to provide people with a busy city life a breath of fresh air near the restorative salt waters of the nearby lake. It was soon equipped with a railroad station and ended up having a population of more than 5,000 residents. The project was also destined to fail soon enough, as the unusual amount of rain at that time caused Lake Epicuén to swell. In 1985, the water took over the local dam, and the town was flooded. The waters were so deep that they even reached a depth of 33 feet in 1993. They only began to recede in 2009 and left behind the remaining buildings, literally encrusted in salt. No one came back to the town except for Pablo Novak, who returned here back in 2012 and was the only resident of Villa Epicuén at the time.
As an experienced sailor and the first man to ever sail non-stop on his own around North and South America, Matt Rutherford has seen a lot during his voyages. But what he saw in 2013 while sailing through the waters of the Atlantic with his colleague surely stands out. Some 800 miles off the coast of Bermuda, not far away from the famous Bermuda Triangle, they noticed a boat that seemed to be moving by itself. The sails weren't up and the motor wasn't running. The sailors decided to check if there was someone who needed their help aboard, so they moved closer to the mysterious ship. Once they got there, things only got weirder, as they realized there wasn't a living soul aboard. Rutherford started filming to document their discovery. The boat looked so awfully abandoned that they expected to find some pretty scary things in there. But it didn't stop Rutherford from searching the vessel. The boat, which turned out to be named Wolfhound, looked like an upscale one, probably costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was pretty weird to find it floating by itself in the middle of the ocean. It seemed like whoever abandoned it was leaving in a rush. There were clothes and other personal belongings all over the main cabin. Some parts of the ceiling had fallen and some drawers had popped open. The brave sailors decided to tow the ghost ship back to Bermuda. It wasn't easy because Wolfhound was bigger and heavier than their boat. After days at sea, the crew was running low on fuel and asked a passing freighter to stop and give them some gas. They kept pulling Wolfhound until the tow line got wrapped around the rudder and they realized they could get stranded in the Bermuda Triangle. So they had to abandon the ship. What really happened and how Wolfhound ended up in the middle of the ocean will probably remain a mystery. Rumor has it that it belonged to a member of the Royal Irish Yacht Club. The ship was going on its first voyage from Connecticut to Bermuda and then Antigua. It got in a terrible storm around 400 miles away from Delaware. The winds were so strong that the yacht suffered 2 knockdowns. A Greek cargo ship rescued the crew. They left the ship with an emergency beacon on. The rescued crew members shared that they saw the ship sink, which only adds more questions to the story. How did it get back to the surface? Does the Bermuda Triangle have anything to do with that? Christopher Columbus himself reported some unusual compass activity going on in this mysterious area while he was on his way to the New World. Despite the stories of more than 50 ships and 20 planes disappearing in the area, it remains one of the most heavily traveled shipping routes in the world. Some skeptics believe that this fact solves the Bermuda Triangle mystery. It could make sense because the busier the area, the more accidents happen there. But then again, it's not the number of disappearances that makes the place so mysterious. It's the lack of explanation and wreckage lost for good. The first ever confirmed ship to vanish in the Bermuda Triangle was the USS Pickering. In 1800, it departed from the US on its way to the West Indies. The ship sailed into the Bermuda Triangle along with its 90-man crew. No one ever heard anything from them ever since. The popular explanation is that the ship was taken out by a storm. But because no one found any wreckage, we'll never know for sure. The largest ship that has ever disappeared in this mysterious area was the USS Cyclops. In March 1918, carrying a crew of 306 people, the USS Cyclops left Barbados and headed home to Baltimore. The ship passed through the Bermuda Triangle on its journey and vanished into thin air, or rather, water. The Cyclops never sent any distress signal and disappeared without any explanation or trace. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only place in the world where ships go missing or mysteriously resurface. One of the most famous ghost ship stories would be of SS Bechimo. The large cargo steamer was built in Sweden. On October 1st, 1931, it got caught in pack ice. The crew decided to wait it out and managed to break free after a couple of days, only to get trapped again in less than a week. This time, they didn't manage to make it out. A rescue team went by air to save 22 of the crew members. 15 other members stayed in a wooden shelter they built not far away from the ship. Their plan was to wait out the winter and get back aboard. At the end of November, a strong blizzard was rushing through the area. When it was over, Bechimo seemed to have gone away with the storm. The captain decided it must have broken and sunk, but a few days later, a local hunter informed them that he had seen the ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew managed to find the ship and took the most valuable cargo from its hold. They had fears that Bechimo wouldn't live through that rough water, but it did manage to survive after all. Once the ice was gone, it floated away and ended up drifting along the shores of Canada and Alaska. Many people reported seeing the ghost ship in an open sea. Some even tried to board it to save the ship, but the weather didn't allow it to happen. The last time someone saw SS Bechimo was in 1969, 38 years after its crew had left it. It could still be drifting somewhere in the ocean. The story of MV Hoita happened in the South Pacific. The ship was originally a wooden luxury yacht. After serving for 20 years to various owners, it became a merchant ship. In 1959, it set on a trading voyage that was supposed to last around 2 days. When it didn't reach its destination on time, no one was worried at first, as things happen in the open waters. After another day, and no distress signals from the Hoita. It was obvious that something serious was going on with it. There were 25 people aboard, and their families wanted to find them. A search and rescue crew worked for 6 days looking for the ship, or at least its wreckage, in an area of nearly 100,000 square miles. That's 1.5 times as big as Florida. Sadly, the mission had come back with no results. It seemed like Hoita had disappeared without a trace. A month later, another merchant ship noticed Hoita drifting in the ocean, miles and miles away from its original route, and none of the crew members or passengers were on board. The cargo had also disappeared. The lifeboats were also gone, so the people must have escaped the ship hoping to save themselves. It turned out that the crew had been trying to get help as they tuned the radio to the International Distress Channel. But the damaged cable didn't let them send the signal any further than 2 miles. It also looked like when they were leaving the ship, the crew took the logbook with them, and we still don't know what exactly happened to Hoita. Family members of those who were on board are still looking for answers. One professor claims it must have been a corroded pipe that leaked and flooded the vessel, but we'll most likely never know for sure. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there is an area nicknamed the Devil's Sea. It's believed to be one of the 12 vile vortices around the Earth. Some people claim that vile vortices have weird things going on in them because the pull of the planet's electromagnetic waves is stronger there than anywhere else. The most famous ship that disappeared in the area was a fishery patrol vessel in 1952. The ship went there to investigate the vessels that went missing previously and disappeared along with 31 crew members. Scientists who don't believe it was a mysterious disappearance blame the underwater volcano eruption for what happened.
I've made a list of some of the creepiest abandoned projects in the world. There's everything from ghost scrapers to bygone amusement parks. Fancy a tour? If you've ever seen Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island, you know how eerie islands can be extremely creepy. Even though this abandoned place looks like the set of a horror movie, it's as real as it gets. The so-called Hashima Island lies 9 miles from the city of Nagasaki. It's been abandoned for almost 50 years. You see, when humans leave buildings unoccupied and unattended in deserted areas for quite some time, nature usually takes over. Judging by the looks of it today, I would have never guessed that Hashima Island was a hub for undersea coal mining. All the coal extracted from the area would be shipped to the rest of Japan to fuel the country's swift industrialization process. But mineral resources are finite, we know that. So, when the coal reserves started to empty, there was not so much for people to do around the area. Which leads us back to today. If you're feeling adventurous, you can take a boat ride from Nagasaki to Hashima Island and experience this dystopian sci-fi city firsthand. You'll tour empty apartment buildings overtaken by grass and be served away from any possible collapsing buildings. Sounds like a great idea for a Sunday. What do you say? This is what I like to call Disney, but with a dark twist. In 2014, a group of developers thought it would be a great idea to build a luxurious villa of Disney-like castles in the middle of a Turkish forest area. They were aiming for upper-class Europeans who had something from 375,000 to 500,000 euros in their pockets to invest in the endeavor. Since it was built near a town known for its hot springs, the owners of these luxurious condos could even enjoy their own jacuzzis filled with rehabilitating waters. The thing is, the public didn't love the idea. Some started to complain that the architecture was far from the classic Ottoman style of the region, while others thought the company cut too many trees to build this fairy tale town. In the end, the developers accumulated so many fines that it had to declare bankruptcy, and the project was abandoned. They didn't tear the castles down, though, so it just looks like a twisted live-action Disney movie over there. Now, skyscrapers are neat, but have you ever seen the world's tallest ghost scraper? The Golden Finance 117 was supposed to be the centerpiece of the Golden Metropolitan Scheme, a sprawling man-made town owned by billionaire Paine Tong. The mini-city would be a residential and commercial hub, minutes away from downtown Tianjin. It would be filled with French and Italian-style manors, a polo club, and even a wine museum. The developers were certainly aiming to attract the super-rich. The 128-floor building was envisioned as the mini-city's crown jewel. And I mean that literally, since the top of the building would be shaped like a diamond. Construction started back in 2008, and it still hasn't been finished. The overall project was estimated to cost $10 billion, but because of several unfortunate events, it never fully materialized. Some say that the project was probably doomed from the start, since the people who could afford to live somewhere like that wouldn't want to pay so much to live in a second-tier industrial city. Oh, and as you might remember, there was a big economic recession back in 2008 that really slowed things down. Still, this enormous ghost scraper was the 5th tallest building in the world at the time. Now, if you had to pick 3 words synonymous with utopia, what would you choose? I'd say things like happiness, peace, and abundance. This meant-to-be utopian city couldn't be further away from these qualities, though. Welcome to the Mojave Desert, located in California. Can you see the city grid on the sandy ground? These lines are the remains of a utopian city that never made it to its final stage. This town was supposed to be called California City. The utopian town was envisioned by Nate Mendelsohn, a university professor who studied a lot about urban planning. The project began in the late 1950s when he bought over 80,000 acres of land in the desert. He thought of a place where families would thrive. At the time, housing was affordable, and the town came equipped with leisure options such as a golf course, swimming pool, and recreation fields. Some people did buy lots over there, but the project was interrupted. That's why, if you're driving outside of LA, you might see a small island of houses, which is a tiny fraction of what California City was supposed to be. What European country would you say is filled with abandoned places? If you said Spain, then you got it right. Let's name a few. What was once planned to be a luxury resort is now a graffiti haven. The place started to be built in 1969, but just a year later, construction halted. In Ibiza, you'll also find something called the Festival Club. You see, Ibiza wasn't always the party place it is today. This club opened its doors in 1972, but 2 years later, Spain lived through a big oil crisis and fewer tourists went to visit the island. The club was eventually abandoned, and today, visitors come to check out the graffiti art. The exterior of the houses is in perfect shape, which makes it hard to believe that all these houses were left to their own luck. According to the explorer who found them, they've been abandoned since 2008. Again, that terrible year of recession. The company that built it went broke in the final quarter of construction of the condo and abandoned the project at its very final stage. What a sad ending. Now, in Miami Beach, you'll find a luxurious abandoned hotel that once hosted a Beatles concert. In the late 1950s, it was the go-to spot for celebrities such as Frank Sinatra. Today, the Deauville Resort has already been demolished. It was shut down in 2017 after a fire damaged some of the building structures. For a while, they decided to leave the hotel as it was, with its furniture and memorabilia still inside. Let's see what it looked like. The main entrance and lobby gave out a lot of 1950s vibe. The kitchen was still equipped with dishware and cutlery. The bathrooms had stalls and hairdryers available for use, and one could find electronic room keys thrown all over the floor. The hotel's main ballroom was where the magic used to happen. In 1964, the Beatles played a concert there that drove thousands of unticketed fans to stand outside, waiting to get a glimpse of the stars. The Deauville might have been a huge part of American cultural history, but today, it's nothing more than an abandoned site. Now, there is no doubt that some of the most interesting abandoned places in the world were once amusement parks. Amusement parks are usually filled with so much laughter and joyful times. But not these ones. Neri Dreamland was meant to be Japan's Disney World, but the project failed with time. Today, Neri Dreamland is nothing but a dream. If you were visiting it before it was taken down, this is what you would see. Your heart would beat faster than usual when you passed a fog-covered roller coaster. Was that meant to be the Matterhorn? Yup. Everything about this place said you shouldn't be there. But you're too curious. Tossed on the park's floor, you would see reels of tickets and disfigured stuffed animals. Fancy walking through an empty diner? It's bizarre how the tables and stools were left in place. Walking through what was once a gift shop, you would see empty shelves and an old-school cash machine. Now, are you as disturbed as I am after watching this? Yikes!
The moon shines brightly and illuminates the black water of the ocean. Thick fog descends on it in ominous silence. Then, it's suddenly broken by the creaking of wooden boards, followed by a rippling of the waves. Through the fog, you see the outline of an old large ship. Its hull is rusty, and a strange cold is coming from it. But the most unsettling thing is that there's no one on the deck. The ship sails without a crew. No, this isn't a mythical Flying Dutchman, but a very real ghost ship. September 2nd, 2019. The British Royal Navy's ice patrol ship, called the HMS Protector, sails through the calm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The time is 11 p.m. Some of the ship's crew are on deck, while others are sleeping in their cabins. The captain steers the ship and looks straight at the horizon. The sky is lit up by an orange twilight, and clouds float in the distance. Suddenly, against this beautiful landscape, one of the sailors notices the black silhouette of an unknown ship. The captain slows down and steers the ship a little closer to the mysterious vessel. This is an old cargo ship, 250 feet long. Attempts to contact the crew members lead to nothing. It seems the unknown boat is floating in the ocean by itself. There's no one on board, at least, no one alive. The deck of the ship creaks from rocking on the waves. The sun sinks below the horizon, and it gets dark. The ship looks terrifying. British sailors don't dare to climb on that strange deck. They take a photo, post it on the internet, and sail away. Many people on the internet will assume the sailors met a real ghost ship. 5 months later, we're in the village of Ballycotton in County Cork, Ireland. A local leaves the house early in the morning to go for a daily run. Music in his headphones, fresh cool air, and a scenic route are ideal conditions for a good workout. The jogger runs along the road on the coast of the Celtic Sea. There was a strong storm last night, and now the sea looks calm. The man runs along the top of a low cliff and notices a huge vessel. An old rusty cargo ship 250 feet long lies on the beach, right among the rocks. No people on board. It seems the ship has been here for ages, but the local is sure this vessel wasn't here yesterday. A little later, it turns out this is the same ship that the sailors from the HMS Protector saw 5 months ago, thousands of miles from this place. The cargo ship, called the Alta, was built in 1976. Nobody knows who used it all this time and for what purposes. It's only known that in 2017, the ship was purchased by a new owner and marked with the flag of Tanzania. It's important to say that almost all cargo ships are equipped with AIS, Automatic Identification System, which is needed to track ship movements in the ocean. Since 2015, something strange started happening with the Alta's AIS. The ship disappeared from the satellites, then reappeared again. Over the past few years, this ship had changed several names and flags. It's not surprising that its AIS shut off and turned on numerous times. It's said that some of those who disable AIS on their ships do so to hide outlaw activities. The ship's captain, whoever it was, clearly didn't want to show the Alta's movements. As AIS showed in 2017, the ship had sailed near Greek port cities. The Alta made 12 stops in 3 such cities in different parts of Greece. Then, the AIS signal disappeared, and 10 months later, the Alta reappeared near the northern coast of Africa, 1,200 miles from Greece. In September of 2018, the ship was sailing about 1,400 miles southeast of Bermuda, and at that time, the crew members started having problems. There were 10 people on board the Alta. On September 19th, the ship's engine failed right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The nearest shore was very far away. The ship began to drift. As days passed, the crew couldn't fix the vessel. Food supplies were running low. The crew started to panic and tried to contact someone. The situation got worse as a strong hurricane was approaching the place where the ship broke down. Crew members contacted the U.S. Coast Guard. On October 2nd, a helicopter headed towards the ship. Food and water were unloaded on the Alta. This was enough for the crew to bide their time for several days. About a week later, a rescue boat sailed about 1,500 miles to reach the Alta and help the stranded sailors. Shortly before the start of the hurricane, American rescuers succeeded. The entire crew of the wrecked ship was taken to Puerto Rico. The Alta remained drifting in the ocean. After a while, another ship arrived to tow it to the coast of Guyana. Then, something went wrong again. The ship was hijacked. Who did it and why remains a mystery to this day. But then, for some unknown reason, the thieves decided to abandon the ship and left it to drift in the ocean. For almost a year, the ship's location couldn't be tracked. Then, in September 2019, the vessel was found by the British Royal Navy. How the Alta was able to cover the distance across the Atlantic and wash up on the coast of Ireland is unknown. An investigation has been launched in Ireland. It's necessary to identify the owner of the vessel and find a responsible person to take on the task of towing it. But no one has since been found. Once, an unknown person called the Irish authorities and introduced themselves as the owner of the ship, but didn't provide any evidence. Several barrels of oil were found on board the Alta. To dismantle the ship, the Irish authorities will need to spend about 10 million euros. Local residents are annoyed by the wreck too. Corroding metal is bad for the environment, and kids have already snuck on board and posted a video on the internet from inside the abandoned ship. The further fate of the Alta remains unresolved. It's still lying there. That ship sailed in the ocean for just 2 years. Now imagine if some other managed to drift for 38. In all that time, no one could catch this ship, and people still seek it. That vessel is called the SS Bechimo. It was a merchant ship owned by a Canadian trading company. In 1931, the ship got stuck in ice off the coast of Alaska. A strong snowstorm began. The team waited a week for it to end, but the storm only intensified. One day, the weather improved a bit, and part of the team was evacuated to the nearest city. Another part of the crew, with the captain, set up camp near the ship. The storm started again and didn't stop for a long time. The blizzard was so heavy that the ship's captain couldn't see beyond his arm's reach. Finally, when the storm was over, the captain saw that the ship simply vanished. He decided the Bechimo sank during the storm. A week later, the ship was found, drifting near the place where it was lost. The hull of the ship was damaged so badly that it was unsafe to sail on it. The captain decided to abandon the ship. However, it didn't sink. For the next 38 years, it was drifting at various points along the Alaskan coast. Several times, people climbed on the ship, including native Alaskan residents and a group of researchers. Attempts to save the vessel from the sea ended in failure. The salvage operations were hampered by drifting ice and bad weather. The last time it was seen was in 1969. The ship was frozen and blocked by the ice. In 2006, the government created a special project to find the Bechimo. However, in all these years, the ship still hasn't been found. Its fate is unknown. It's likely that the ship has finally found peace and is now lying on the seabed of the Chukchi Sea. Imagine discovering an ancient city without leaving the comfort of your home. In 1963, A man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey did exactly that. He was renovating his house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He continued digging and saw a tunnel. This is how Derinkuyu underground city was found. Derinkuyu is one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements of Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. This engineering masterpiece has 8 levels. The inhabitants living on those floors had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors are connected by an extensive network of tunnels. It's believed that the underground city was built as a shelter. You can't see the construction from the outside. Its depth is approximately 279 feet. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people, plus their livestock and food supplies. There's also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. People used it both for ventilation and as a well. The well supplied water both to the villagers living on the surface and to those hiding in the underground city. Interestingly, those living on the bottom levels were able to cut off the water supply for the upper and ground levels. This kept the water safe from potential poisoning. The place was designed for protection. The tunnels could be blocked from the inside with huge round rolling stone doors. The passageways were extremely narrow. Potential invaders had to enter the tunnels one at a time. Seems like they thought of everything in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists believed the Phrygians were the ones who first built the levels. After them, the structure was used and enhanced in Roman times. This was when the chapels were added. The golden time of Derinkuyu, however, was during the Byzantine era. But how did these people manage to create such tunnels? Well, the rock they carved them into wasn't usual. It was soft volcanic rock. It appeared due to a geological process that began millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash. It then solidified into this soft rock. When the natural forces of wind and water eroded softer parts, only hard elements remained. Fun fact, fairy chimneys are also made of intricately shaped volcanic soft rock, but they formed naturally without any human intervention. I'm still in Turkey, but this time, my destination is Çanakkale, where a myth came to life. For 3,000 years, people believed that Homer's Iliad was fiction and that Troy never existed. In 1863, everything changed. Expatriate Frank Calvert discovered ancient ruins in western Turkey. He was convinced they belonged to the ancient city of Troy. Heinrich Schliemann examined this area in 1868. That's when Troy saw sunlight again after all those centuries. Troy has complex layers. Over the years, 9 ancient cities were built on top of one another. Historians say that the area was strategically located between Europe and Asia, so it became a prosperous trade and cultural center. This strategic position made Troy attractive throughout history. After the Trojan conflict, the city was abandoned between the years 1100 to 700 BCE. Then Greek settlers rediscovered the area, and Alexander the Great ruled there. The Romans then invaded the city. Speaking of this event, the first thing you would see when visiting the site is a replica of the wooden Trojan horse from a movie shot in 2004. The next stop is Lothal. In the 1950s, Lothal and several other Harappan sites were discovered in India. These new provinces extended the boundaries of the Indus Valley civilization. Lothal was an important part of the Harappan civilization. It had vast cotton and rice fields. Plus, it had a bead-making factory. Beads were made from semi-precious stones, like agate. Many of these beads were later found in Mesopotamia, which serves as evidence that Lothal was a thriving trading port. Archaeologists believe that the city was part of an ancient trade route. Traces of agriculture? Check. Traces of trade? Check. What else? The remains of residential buildings, streets, bathing pavements, and drains. Some real city planning, and impressive examples of early urbanization. The town was well constructed. There were modern houses. Some of them had 6 rooms, bathrooms, a large courtyard, and even a veranda. Lothal also had the world's oldest known dock. It linked the city with the Sabarmati River and the trade route. The ancient Mayan city of Calakmul is located in southern Mexico in the tropical forest of the Tierras Bajas. From 500 CE to 800 CE, Calakmul was home to over 50,000 people. There was a central plaza surrounded by outer districts. And if we count both the inhabitants of all those outer areas and those who lived in the center, Calakmul had a population of more than 1.5 million people. It was a city that was habitable for 12 centuries. It's believed that the place had more constructions than any other excavated Maya settlements in the region. After 1000 CE, the Maya civilization there faced a downfall. The settlement that was once the center of Mesoamerica was almost completely abandoned. The ancient city was at the heart of the second largest tropical forest in America. The site is well preserved, so today, if you were to visit it, you would be able to picture what life looked like in ancient Mayan times. The city remains include architectural complexes and sculpted monuments, defensive systems, quarries, water management features, agricultural terraces, massive temple pyramids, and palaces, not to mention a variety of body ornaments and other accompanying objects. It proves that complex state-organized societies lived in this tropical forest. The Mayans depicted nature in their paintings, pottery, sculptures, rituals, and even food. I'm moving on to a place people thought didn't really exist. The city of Thonis Heracleion appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts. Turns out, it was waiting to be discovered for thousands of years. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt. But then, archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Heracleion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists consider a 16-foot tall statue and the temple remains the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals. You can think of it as an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, Heracleion got covered with water. Then, Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So, after the disaster, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its rediscovery in 1933. Mesa Verde is an American national park in Colorado. The park is the largest archaeological preserve in the U.S., with more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish. The name comes from the shape of the mountains in the area, with flat tops and steep sides. The park is an ancestral Puebloan archaeological site. Starting from 7500 BCE, a group of nomadic Paleo-Indians seasonally lived in Mesa Verde. They were hunters, gatherers, and crop farmers. They built the first pueblos in the region. By the end of the 12th century, the Mesa Verdeans began constructing massive cliff dwellings, which are now the best-known structures in the park.
Well, what do you think? The biggest log cabin in the world was truly magnificent. Known as the Forestry Building, it was enormous, at over 200 feet long and more than 70 feet high. It was built in 1905 in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. And Portland was known for its flourishing wheat and flour industry, a growing shipping port, and timber industry at that time. This log cabin was part of the big exposition held in Portland. It took 2 years to build it. The Forestry Building was constructed out of whole logs. Even the bark was still in place. The interior of the cabin held 54 giant unpeeled logs, and some of them were 6 feet across. These logs supported a 2-story center aisle lit by skylights. It was designed in the shape of a cross. And then, one night, almost 60 years later, one of the neighbors sensed smoke. He looked outside. Fire! The Forestry Building was quickly disappearing in front of his eyes. The fire crew came only 15 minutes after the fire started, but despite all their efforts, they couldn't save the cabin. The flames were enormous, nearly 10 stories high. The fire was so strong, it illuminated the sky for miles, giving the whole neighborhood an orange glow. The windows were popping out because of the heat. Glass was falling down, and ashes the size of giant snowflakes were falling to the ground within a mile of the cabin. The Forestry Building was gone in only 2 hours. The fire eruption happened because of bad electrical wiring from the time the cabin was built. Now, there are more awesome timber structures. For example, check out the Great Eastern Temple in Japan from the early 8th century. It's even a UNESCO World Heritage Site today. It was incredibly hard to build it. Construction work took the team a long time to build the structure because of several fires and strong earthquakes. The project was so big, and maybe even too ambitious, because it almost bankrupted the Japanese economy back then. The Great Eastern Temple required several imports of gold, and it used up almost all of the bronze reserves in Japan. It's been standing powerful and strong for centuries, but still had to go through so many reconstructions and setbacks. One of the biggest wooden structures human hands ever put together was built in New Mexico. It's called Atlas, and it was created of a 10-story high, 1,000-foot long structure. It was made using laminate, glue, and fiberglass pegs. It was created to test the electromagnetic pulse resistance of flying aircraft. It produced an actual EMP, which was never practiced before. It was a big investment, $60 million, but it operated for a little bit more than a decade. During that period, as the technology was developing, computer simulations ended up being more cost-effective than Atlas. The world's tallest wooden building is located in Norway. It was finished in March 2019. The tower is 280 feet tall. There are 18 floors with a hotel, residential apartments, offices, a restaurant to grab a nice meal, and additional features such as a swimming hall. The first 10 floors are constructed of prefabricated wooden elements. Prefabricated means something built from pieces that have already been made in a factory, so you can put them together on the building site relatively quickly. Concrete makes up the upper floor decks. That way, the building gets more weight, which is important for its stabilization. Prefab sections mean that the tower was finished way faster than a concrete building of the same height. Ho-Ho in Austria is the next one on our list, as the second tallest wooden tower in the world. It has 24 floors and is 276 feet tall. It was open to the public in 2019. It's 75% wood. The rest, meaning its core, is made of concrete. Interior walls and ceilings have a thin layer of concrete that supports them. 3 of the upper floors feature residential apartments. Hey, check out the view. Wouldn't it be cool to live here? There's also a 120-room hotel in the building, which spans 9 floors. Beauty, health and wellness commercial areas, a restaurant, and space for business. This wooden tower has all you need. Brock Commons Tall House is actually a student accommodation facility. It's located in Vancouver, Canada, and is part of the University of British Columbia. 18 floors stretch over 170 feet in height, and there's enough space to accommodate a bit more than 400 students. Similar to many other wood constructions that have been rising all over the world for the past years, this building was also made of prefabricated parts. Because of that, a construction team was able to finish it 70 days after they got all the needed parts. Now, how would you feel spending some time in the biggest tree house in the world? Known as the Minister's Treehouse, it was built in Crossville, Tennessee. It's gigantic, especially considering what you would expect a treehouse to look like. It's a 10-story structure with a living space of more than 32,290 square feet. 6 oaks support it. Plus, over 250,000 nails have been used in that house since 1993. There's even a penthouse on the 10th floor. Also, there's a big space in the center of the house. It's so large, you can literally play basketball games over there. Now, this wasn't an instant product since it took 14 years to finish it. The Minister's Treehouse was completely made out of wood, but the cost of the building still ended up being about $12,000. We're still on American soil, moving to another large log cabin called Timber Moose Lodge. It's in Heber City, Utah, and is considered to be the biggest private log cabin in the United States. More than 26,000 square feet of living space certainly show that. It has 16 bathrooms and just 13 bedrooms. And a sauna, indoor swimming pool, outdoor decks, and balconies. And a magnificent view. It's actually a pretty cool log cabin where you can place up to 60 people. Going to Norway once again to see Tree, the 167 feet tall residential block finished in 2015, only 4 years after they started designing it. There are 64 apartments in the 14-story building. People also call it the Tree because it's designed with wooden materials. Parts of the Tree's facade are clad in metal and glass. This way, the wood is safe from harsh weather conditions. The Tree's weight is, of course, lighter compared to concrete buildings, but its structure is still reinforced because the construction team made a load-bearing framework structure from a glued laminate timber truss. Log cabins were common in North America in the past, but many of them have been burnt down or destroyed in some other way. Of the last big surviving log cabins is Granot Loma. You can find it on the shores of Lake Superior in Michigan. More than 400 Scandinavian craftsmen got together and built Granot Loma between 1919 and 1923. One rich man simply wanted a nice summer house, which ended up as a large, fancy log cabin with a private beach and many other features for relaxation and fun. Wooden buildings are the future because it's all about working with renewable construction materials we can find in nature. And such buildings need to be safe to avoid the destiny of the forestry building from the beginning. That means they need to be as fireproof as possible. A couple of months ago, there was the biggest mass timber fire test ever made in the world. Over 150 experts from across Canada, including engineers, fire officials, architects, and many others, had a chance to watch a full-scale fire test at the Canadian Explosives Research Lab in Ottawa. They needed to see what would happen to a large timber construction when it's exposed to fire. Hey, any guesses? Well, about 40 minutes after the fire reached its peak, the fire self-extinguished. That means the mass timber can take fire as well as non-combustible construction. Mass timber structures can take fire even in the scenario where the sprinkler system won't work and the fire department can't respond at the moment. Well, that's encouraging.
There are many ways you can save your life in extreme situations. For example, when you get lost in the wilderness. But there are just as many myths. Let's have a look at some of them. Rumor has it that if you find yourself surrounded by snow and with no drinking water at hand, eating snow is the best way to rehydrate. Unfortunately, it's just false. Even worse, eating snow can lead to further dehydration. How come? Once you stuff some snow into your mouth, your body has to start a process that will melt the snow and warm it. And you'll need to spend more energy, which will make you lose liquids faster. But it's not all. Eating snow can result in hypothermia, which is twice as dangerous if you're alone in the wilderness. Besides, chances are that snow contains harmful bacteria that will make you sick. So if you don't have any other solution, melt the snow you're going to consume in your hands first to stay away from the snow that doesn't look fresh and white. If you find yourself with frostbite, take care of it as soon as you can. But despite a popular misconception, do not pour hot water on the damaged skin. It can make things much worse. Instead, if you can't see a doctor immediately, remove wet clothing and place the spot with frostbite in warm water. After that, make sure that the damaged body part isn't going to freeze again, and keep it elevated to reduce swelling. Then, put a bandage on the hurt area. If it's your fingers or toes, apply a bandage on each of them separately and then place cotton balls in between so that they don't touch. Never, ever rub the damaged area. If you get lost in the wilderness and have no idea what direction to choose, find a stream or a small creek. Follow it until it merges with a larger river, and it will take you to a more developed and inhabited area where you'll get help. But don't you ever fall for this myth. You can drink the water if you see animals drinking it. If you manage to find a source of water, you need to purify this water first. Your body is very different from those of animals. And if you don't purify the water before drinking it, you can get extremely sick. Even in seemingly clean water, there are millions of microorganisms, and some of them are very dangerous to people. Freshwater springs might be safe to drink from, but in a survival situation, err on the side of caution. There is a survival myth that it's safe to drink water in small amounts, but such a delusion can have very dramatic consequences. Drinking any amount of salt water leads to dehydration much faster than if you don't drink anything at all. The best thing you can do with salt water is to use it for cooling down your body, not drinking. So, let's say you're wandering in the wilderness, lost and desperate, when suddenly you see a cave. Great, it'll make a perfect shelter. There's some wood and tinder you can pick up nearby, and you have matches. It seems all odds are in your favor. And they indeed are if you don't make a fatal mistake, which is building a fire inside the cave. And the main problem isn't the smoke from the fire. The thing is that the heat coming from your fire will cause the rocks, which make up the walls and the ceiling of the cave, to expand. Eventually, they might break, and then you'll get trapped in a rockfall or a landslide. To stay warm and safe at the same time, build a fire right outside the cave. As soon as you realize that you've gotten lost in the woods during a hike, immediately stop. It does sound counterintuitive, I admit, but it's a better solution than to keep walking. Better stay where you are and try to make some kind of shelter. For one thing, when you move, you get dehydrated faster. Besides, the further you travel away from wherever you got lost, the longer it will take a rescue party to find you. There's a myth that if you come across a swarm of bees and disturb these insects, the best course of action is to jump into the water. Unfortunately, it won't do you any good. The bees will just wait until you resurface to breathe. A good solution is to run in a straight line as fast as possible until the bees stop chasing you. An even better alternative is to find shelter, your car, a house, or even a public bathroom, and hide inside. Now, what would you do if you unexpectedly encountered a snake? Would you move towards the reptile and try to shoo it away? Or would you maybe poke it with a stick? Or you could shout at it and stomp your feet. What's your choice? Approaching the reptile and trying to scare it away to save yourself is nothing but a myth. The snake may think you're being aggressive and attack you. But even though snakes don't have ears, they're sensitive to vibrations. That's why raising your voice, banging two sticks together, or stomping your feet can make a snake retreat. But if there's an opportunity to walk away, use it. Here are some other tips that may help you in a critical situation. If you're falling from a cliff, do your best to break your fall into several parts. The shorter they are, the better. Each of the segments will absorb some impact of the fall, and you'll have much higher chances of surviving. Try to grab onto a sturdy object like a bush or a rock on your way to the bottom to slow down your fall. If you've fallen through the ice into freezing water, try to get back to the edge of the ice. Don't pull yourself out by grabbing it. The edge will keep breaking, and you'll exhaust yourself in no time. Kick your legs until your body is positioned horizontally in the water. After that, get out of the water and onto the ice like a seal. Once you've made it there, don't stand up. Remain spread out. This way, your weight will be distributed over a larger area. Then the ice will be less likely to break. If you're at sea and spot a whirlpool coming towards you, don't panic. If you understand which way it's spinning, ride its side and use the whirlpool's current to catapult you out of danger. If you start fighting it, you're likely to get pulled inside. There's also a chance a whirlpool will dissolve or become weaker closer to the bottom. So if you do get trapped by it, take a deep breath and wait for an opportunity to swim up and away. If you get trapped under some debris, for example during an earthquake, your main task is to protect your respiratory system. Plus, you have to make your air supply last as long as possible. Take your shirt off and tie its bottom in a knot. Then put it back on your head through the neck hole. The knot should be positioned over the top of your head. This way, you'll get a makeshift hood that will protect your face from dust, sand, and debris. It'll also provide you with a bit of oxygen while you're trying to get back to the surface. If you've gotten stuck in quicksand, do all you can to keep your head and arms above the surface at all times. Start to carefully wiggle your legs. Quicksand will fill the space your limbs occupied. As soon as you can, stretch out on your back. It will increase your surface area. Keep making tiny movements until your legs are free. You can also use backstroke motions with your arms. It'll help you pull your legs out. If there's nothing to use as tinder to start a fire, unpack your junk food stash. Pringles, Cheetos, and Lay's can serve as effective substitute for dry leaves. The same goes for spaghetti noodles.
So, imagine you're 15 and you get bored of playing video games. Instead, to pass the time, you decide to give some attention to an old hobby of yours, tracking down lost Mayan cities. You've heard that some ancient civilizations are said to have built entire cities based on constellations, so you decide to check out whether that was true for the Mayans. You find a book containing all the constellations the Mayan civilization believed to exist. You open good old Google Maps and map every ancient Mayan city discovered to date. You start seeing that this information actually matches. And truly, the biggest ancient Mayan cities correspond to the brightest and biggest stars of the Mayan constellations. Okay, this is getting interesting. You manage to map out over 100 ancient cities when you suddenly notice something strange. There's an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. Could this mean there is a long-lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? You might think this sounds too daydreaming, but the story is actually true. The previous account happened to a Canadian teenager named William Gaddery. The boy is known as a science genius and had even won an award for the constellation theory we presented just now. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to scour the internet for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. He looked into images from NASA, JAXA, a Japan-based satellite company, and Google Earth. These images were still insufficient to answer his questions, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency. His friend provided him with state-of-the-art satellite imagery that gave him the answer he was looking for. According to the images, there is a large square area right on the border of Mexico and Belize, which looks like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert known as Dr. Armand Laroque from the University of New Brunswick. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. The scientific and archaeological community went crazy with the 15-year-old's discovery. Could this really be true? Some background. Lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the mid-20th century. Since then, ruins from cities such as Tikal, Palenque, and Uxmal have been rediscovered. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. They began to settle in the area as early as 1500 BCE. Experts believe that, at its height, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities, with a population of millions of people. That's a crowd. And their cities were pretty interesting. Their civilization spanned over Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They survived mainly on agriculture, so they developed a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, plazas, and even courts for ball games. The Mayans were keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets, such as Venus and Mars, and they were able to predict the exact dates of eclipses. That's why the methodology William used to discover this long-lost Mayan city was unusual, but not completely surreal. The Mayans were keen astronomers, so it wouldn't be too strange that they built their major architectural feats in relation to the sky, would it? And they wouldn't be the first ones to be doing so. There is a famous fringe of Egyptology dedicated to studying how the Giza pyramids were built in perfect alignment with the Orion constellation, meaning that each pyramid was purposely built to align with one of the major stars of Orion's belt. According to William, he first had the idea to look at the Mayan constellations because he couldn't understand why the Mayans built their cities where they built them. Most major cities, such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal, aren't near any rivers or significant bodies of water. Instead, they're built on marginal lands and on top of mountains, which confused the 15-year-old. His next thought was that it might have something to do with astronomy. William named the new city he discovered Mouth of Fire, which is also my nickname, and he even won a merit award for his hard work. However, his theory was very much contested inside the archaeological community, and many Mayan experts worked to debunk William's findings. Some archaeologists say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Anthony Aveni, a renowned anthropologist and astronomer, referred to William's methodology as an act of creative imagination. He explained that there is no way to be sure what the Mayan constellations really were. It's all just hypothetical. Another debunking of William's findings came from Mayanist David Stewart, who said that the object identified on the satellite imagery is nothing but an old cornfield. His claim was supported by an expedition that took place near the area in 2021, when the archaeologists present reported there was nothing at all in this area. Still, a 15-year-old boy almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. Similar techniques as those used by William are actually being used to unearth lost civilizations all over the world. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parquet, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in Egypt and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any sign of where there could have been cities long ago. What happens, she says, is that any time you have something buried, it's going to be covered either by vegetation, soil or sand, or some other modern construction on top of it. In order to assess whether there is something hidden under large canopies of vegetation or not, she uses infrared technology, for instance. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done in a similar way. Satellite imagery detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people. But in this case, the satellite imagery did indeed correspond to what was on the ground. Researchers from the University of Florida found several mountains that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls, centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans. Advances in satellite tech have also shed new light on long-discovered ancient Mayan cities, such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It was composed of a series of complex monuments, many of them believed to have been the resting places of kings and chiefs. Tikal is already known to have been big, but recent discoveries show it could have been even 3 times larger than what scientists originally believed. The main discovery revolves around a fortification on the outskirts of the city, indicating how far the original city stretched. And new discoveries still take place. In 2017, researchers also unearthed new clues regarding the potential causes of the decline of the Mayan civilization. Using data from a Sidon seawall located 62 miles southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the sudden demise of this great civilization. The information shows that, instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely collapsed in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. Well, it seems like it's a prime time to uncover ancient ruins. What do you say? Will you give it a try as well? Many scary things are hiding in the dark. When you stand on the ship deck in the middle of the boundless ocean and stare into the night distance, your imagination begins to draw terrible pictures. But it's much worse when the horror isn't hidden and fear appears in the light under the rays of the bright sun. When endless snow plains and giant icebergs start driving you mad. Such a horror happened more than 170 years ago to the crew members of two large ships, Erebus and Terror. On May 19, 1845, these two vessels went on a great voyage through Arctic waters to open the Northwest Passage, a route between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean, passing through several icy bays of Canada. By then, both ships had gained fame after several successful expeditions in the Arctic region. Erebus and Terror were equipped with strong hulls that could withstand the pressure of polar icebergs. These were the first vessels of the British Royal Navy equipped with steam engines. Before their last expedition, engineers covered the boats with an extra iron layer to make them more ice-resistant. A lot of food, books, and coal were loaded into the cargo hold. The central stove and the sailors' cabins were connected by special air vents. Everyone was sure that an iceberg wouldn't run the ship through. Fuel and food supplies guaranteed that nobody would be hungry. In every way, those were the most equipped ships of that time for such expeditions. Erebus and Terror sailed from the English village of Greenhithe with 128 crew members. The lead of the whole expedition was Sir John Franklin. 3 months later, the ships were spotted in Baffin Bay, east of the entrance to the passage, and this was the last time Europeans saw them. 3 years later, in 1848, Captain Franklin's wife, Jane Franklin, and other caring people demanded to start an expedition to find the two vessels. The search continued for several years and didn't lead to anything that would reveal the secret of this terrible expedition. They didn't find the ships, but found strange clues that caused more questions than answers. So the first strange thing was the 3 graves found on Beechey Island, located in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. The crew set up a winter camp on the island shore, and for some reason, 3 out of 129 people passed away. Then the ship set off again and got in the trap. Probably Erebus and Terror got stuck in the ice near King William Island. In the middle of a snowy plain, surrounded by cold winds and ice, the crew began to experience serious problems. According to one theory, canned food contained a lot of lead. The sailors could get poisoned by that. And another view says that they got severely sick. Apparently, when the food supplies ran out, the crews went on foot to look for help, but got lost among the snowy plains. Another strange thing was a note on the shore of King William Island in the pocket of one of the crew members. Even now, no one can understand the contents of this paper. The letter had weird words and incoherent sentences like, "All my art, Tom, for I don't think for," or "shall want some grog to wet our whistle." Many words were written backward, and some were smeared. Perhaps the note reveals a secret about the loss of the crew, but it's almost impossible to decipher it. Also, the search team found another note with more understandable records. One of them is dated May 1847. It said everything was fine and the expedition was going according to plan. Another record was made almost a year later, in April 1848. It said the ships got stuck in the ice and the crew left them. The sailors planned to go to the Back River, the Canadian River in the Northwest Territories. It was their last attempt to survive, which unfortunately ended up in failure. For more than 150 years, the fate of both ships remained a mystery. But then, in 2014, a search team found Erebus. The ship's wreckage was on the island a few feet from the water. 2 years later, another expedition discovered Terror on the seabed northwest of Erebus. However, these discoveries didn't help solve the mystery of the expedition, but added even more questions instead. Terror was located 60 miles south of the place where, according to the note, the ships were abandoned. Erebus was also in the wrong place. It's possible that the crew members left the vessel, wrote about it in a note, but then returned and sailed on. Another version says that the moving ice could move the boats. In any case, we won't know what happened to the expedition. Some associate this tragedy with mystical forces. You can see this version in TV series based on these tragic events. But most likely, the crew members found themselves in an ice trap they couldn't escape. Another famous case of the vanishing of sailors happened to the ship Mary Celeste. It was built in Canada in 1861 and named Amazon. It gained notoriety right from the very first voyages of the ship. The ship changed several captains and crashed into the rocks. The broken vessel was resold a few times before receiving repairs. After the upgrade, it got a new name, Mary Celeste, and a new captain, Benjamin Briggs. He was a brave, experienced sailor with a kind heart and high moral qualities. In November 1872, with 10 people on board, Mary Celeste sailed from New York to Italy with a valuable cargo on board. A few days later, another ship, De Gracia, followed it along the same route from the port in New York. Somewhere between the Azores, the captain of the De Gracia, David Morehouse, noticed a ship 6 miles away that was sailing too strangely. It swayed from the side like no one was holding the steering wheel. David came closer and tried to contact the people on board, but there was no response. At that moment, the captain realized that it was Mary Celeste. Together with the crew members, they climbed aboard and found that its sails were slightly torn. There was water in the hold, but it could easily be pumped out. The crew's belongings were in the cabins, and the cargo was untouched. Only one lifeboat and a chronometer, which is a navigation device, were missing. The last record in the logbook said the voyage was going according to plan. Apart from the slightly damaged sails, the vessel was in perfect condition. But something forced all the crew members to leave it. Several members of the De Gracia crew remained on board the Mary Celeste to deliver it to the nearest seaport. One of the versions said that the water pump in the hold could be filled with coal. Before the last trip, Mary Celeste transported a large amount of this material, and some of it could have stuck inside the pump. When the ship got into a storm, the hold flooded a little, and Captain Briggs couldn't understand how critical the situation was. There were too many barrels, so he couldn't determine the water level. It was dangerous to stay on board since the ship could sink. Therefore, the captain decided to evacuate by lifeboat. Perhaps they were close to land, and Briggs decided to sail in that direction. But the storm got stronger and sank the boat. Another version says that De Gracia attacked Mary Celeste and got rid of its crew to get the cargo. The court couldn't prove this, but the reputation of Captain David Morehouse was damaged, and he had difficulty finding a job after that. The story of Mary Celeste became world famous, so people created many different versions. Of course, someone claimed that something mystical had happened to the ship, but such theories have no evidence. There are so many records and documents on the internet about this case, so anyone can try to sort out the truth from the fiction.
You are lost deep within the jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. There are strange noises all around you, and to make it worse, the sun is setting. Soon, you'll be alone in the middle of an unknown rainforest. Guess it was a pretty bad idea to come looking for El Dorado on your own, wasn't it? You keep walking as fast as you can, when suddenly, wait! What's this you're seeing? It looks like large stairways made out of stone. This definitely doesn't look natural, so you take a picture. Maybe you didn't strike gold, but you might have just found something relevant. Congratulations! You found Akamtun, a long-lost Mayan city. Hidden 37 miles into the jungle, the name literally translates to stone column. Stone was probably in at the time, so these guys used a lot of it to build their pyramids, houses, and even ball courts. If you ever thought that Europeans invented ball games, think twice. Mayans love to play ball games for recreational purposes. Akamtun is part of a series of other long-lost Mayan cities that are being discovered with the help of new technology nowadays. We'll talk more about the other ones in a jiffy. Perhaps the biggest surprise of this one is that it was surrounded by wetlands, which is why the city was built on high ground. The city was monumental, covering an area of over 120 acres. That would be as big as 90 football fields right next to each other. Scientists have found proof that Akamtun had pyramids of up to 49 feet high, and that it was likely an important social hub between 250 and 1000 CE. This is definitely a game changer. But lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the 19th century. Modern technologies, such as LiDAR imaging, help archaeologists see through dense canopies of the forests. This means that people don't really have to risk getting lost in the tropical jungle like you did at the beginning of this video. LiDAR works sort of like an X-ray. It sends out laser beams that can detect any signs of ruins or ancient constructions. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parchak, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in South America, Egypt, and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any signs of where there could have been cities long ago. She says that more often than not, what happens is that ruins are covered by vegetation, soil, or sand, which makes them super tricky to find. But thanks to these awesome tools, scientists also made the huge discovery of ancient Mayan causeways, which spread throughout old Mayan territories. I mean, take a look at these roadways. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places such as Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130 feet wide roads painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan highways we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over the swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possible 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spiderweb, and from what archaeologists have gathered, this huge system of roads worked to connect a big system of economic and social interactions between Mayan cities. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 2000 BCE, was made of small, tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids, with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone to make them white. That's pretty cool, right? But let's take a few steps back for a moment to get some context. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. Until now, experts believe that at its apex, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities with a population of millions of people. That's a lot of folks. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. And they survived mainly on agriculture. The thing is, the Yucatan Peninsula was an extremely difficult place to grow crops. So the Mayans had to develop a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, and plazas. The Mayans might have been keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets such as Venus and Mars, as well as the exact dates of eclipses. If you've ever seen examples of ancient Mayan cities, this is Tikal. Located at the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan conquest state. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It's composed of a series of complex monuments. The North Acropolis is one of Tikal's most ancient complexes of monuments. Built solely by human hands around 350 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Its monuments are up to 200 feet high. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. Then there's Chichen Itza. It's got one of the best preserved pyramids on Earth to date. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site covers 4 square miles of land. The highlight is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform, which makes for 365 steps, the same number of days as the solar year. You can see that these folks were a pretty big deal, huh? That's why nobody can really understand what happened to them. There's a big lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? New research in 2017 did bring some new discoveries into the mix. Using data from a site at Ceibal, located at southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected demise of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. It's hard to pinpoint the exact causes, though. But hey, recent discoveries are shedding a big light on humanity's past. Not only about the Mayan Empire, but about other long-lost civilizations of South America. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done using satellite imaging technology and is also shocking scientists. Some images from near the Xingu River, also in the Amazon, suggest that cities of millions of people might have existed inside the jungle, way before our modern civilization ever existed. I mean, if this doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. Satellite imagery also detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 and 1200 CE in the Bolivian Amazon forest. These proofs suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people right in the middle of the Amazon forest. When researchers from the University of Florida went on ground to check the satellite information, they were shocked to find several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans.
Guess what? A treasure that was thought to be lost forever has been found. Back in April 2015, Deep Ocean Search, a team of treasure hunters, recovered 50 million pounds worth of silver rupee coins from the British steamship. The ship sank in the 40s during its journey from India to England. The wreck was found at a whopping depth of almost 17,000 feet, setting a world record for the deepest recovery ever. To put that into perspective, the famous Titanic wreck is only found at a depth of 12,500 feet. But don't be duped. This was no easy feat. The team faced multiple breakdowns of their systems due to the pressure, temperature, and repeated dives at such a depth. Did you hear about the epic treasure found on the Black Swan wreck? It was discovered by Odyssey Marine Exploration in 2007 off Gibraltar, and they hit the jackpot. The salvage team found a whopping 17 tons of coins worth $500 million. Can you even imagine that much money? It's said to be the biggest haul ever found in the treasure hunting world. But the crew didn't spill the beans on where they found it or what kind of coins they uncovered. They just hightailed it back to the US with their loot. Sneaky. An old man in the Dominican Republic was selling a coin that ended up being the oldest coin ever minted in the New World. And that's just the start of the craziest shipwreck story ever. The team at Deep Blue Marine used some fancy sonar to search the area where the coin was found, and they stumbled upon parts of a wrecked ship. They also found jade statues, ancient Mayan bling, and gold coins from way back in 1535. Like, one set of 4 coins alone is worth a cool $1 million. The crew got to keep half of their booty while the Dominican Republic authorities snagged the rest. It's believed the ship sank during a gnarly hurricane just a few years after Columbus discovered the New World. No other shipwreck has ever turned up such ancient artifacts. We all heard about the Titanic, the OG shipwreck, known for its epic tragedy when it hit an iceberg in 1912. But what's even crazier is that $300 million worth of diamonds went down with it. Like, can you imagine? American and French researchers who found the ship auctioned off nearly 6,000 items recovered from the wreck. We're talking diamond bracelets, fancy dishes, and even a postcard a passenger wrote to their parents. Treasures from the Titanic are still popping up for auction. Like, some deck chairs from the first-class promenade deck were auctioned off for £85,000. They're too delicate to sit on now, but still a crazy piece of history. The Schmidts, a family of treasure hunters, just stumbled upon over $1 million worth of gold artifacts in shallow waters only 30 miles north of West Palm Beach. And get this, one of the coins was even meant for the King of Spain. These treasures were part of the 1715 treasure fleet that sank 300 years ago due to a massive hurricane after leaving Havana, Cuba. Can you believe it was only 15 feet deep in the water? They found 51 gold coins and 40 feet of ornate gold chain. Talk about hitting the jackpot. Brent Brisbane, the owner of 1715 Fleet Queen's Jewels, LLC, said those finds were important not just for their monetary value, but their historical importance. But there's more. The ship was recovered over 50 years ago, and divers have only found about $50 million worth of treasure. It's believed that there's still over $400 million worth of treasure hiding below the sea. The ultimate party of exploration just got a little more exciting. We're talking about Vasco da Gama's Esmeralda, the oldest shipwreck from Europe's age of exploration, baby. This bad boy was wrecked in a gnarly storm back in 1503 along the India route from Europe and the Arabian Sea. But wait, it gets better. The wreck was actually found way back in 1998, but it took almost 2 decades to excavate it. And guess what? They found rare coins, a ship bell, and other cool artifacts that confirm the identity of the ship. And the treasures are still being uncovered. Just last year, in 2017, they discovered a unique navigational tool called an astrolabe at the wreck. How cool is that? A bunch of Indonesian fishermen found a super old ship from the 9th century off Belitung Island in 1998. It proved that trading between China and the Middle East was totally a thing back then thanks to the maritime Silk Route. The wreck is so cool that it's also known as the Tang Treasure because it's the biggest collection of Chinese Tang Dynasty artifacts ever found in one spot. But there's some serious drama going down over an exhibition of these priceless treasures. It's like a battle between commercial treasure salvage and archaeological preservation of shipwrecks. Who will win? Only time will tell. Meet the holy grail of shipwrecks. It's the Spanish galleon San Jose, and it was loaded with silver, gold, and emeralds worth billions of dollars today. But get this, it sunk after a battle with British ships off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia, way back in 1708. Crazy, right? But here's the kicker. 300 years later, in 2015, some awesome peeps discovered the wreck on the ocean floor. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution used a cool underwater vehicle to identify the ship by its distinctive cannons, and they're still recovering treasure as we speak. So, if you're feeling lucky, keep your eyes peeled for other hidden treasures that haven't been found yet. The ultimate jackpot, the sunken mother lode of the Nuestra Señora de Atocha. was discovered off the coast of Key West, Florida, in July 1985. Mel Fisher, the legendary treasure hunter, spent a whopping 16 years searching for it. The Atocha was on a mission to bring back loads of riches to Spain from Havana, Cuba back in 1622, but got caught up in a gnarly hurricane. To celebrate the 30th anniversary of the discovery, there was a sick auction where people could buy pieces of the Atocha's treasure, like gold and emeralds. If you're keen to see more of this epic haul, head to the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum in Key West. The whole shebang is worth around $450 million, no biggie. Hey, have you ever dreamt of finding buried treasure and becoming a millionaire overnight? Well, guess what? It's not just a dream. Meet Forrest Fenn, the man who hid a chest filled with $1 to $5 million worth of treasure in the Rocky Mountains. And get this, it took 10 years for someone to finally find it. Fenn announced the treasure hunt back in 2010, and over the years, tens of thousands of people set off to look for it. The treasure chest was filled with 265 American gold eagles and double eagles, ancient coins, gold nuggets, and more. But finding it wasn't easy. Fenn used a poem with 24 lines that had hints in it, and it took some serious decoding skills to figure out where the treasure was hidden. Finally, in June 2020, the long-awaited news came. The treasure had been found. The lucky winner was Jack Stueff, a former journalist and medical student. The treasure was hidden under a canopy of stars in the forest in the Rocky Mountains, and it was so well hidden that not all the advertised treasures were found in the chest. But don't let that stop you from trying your luck at finding buried treasure. Who knows? Maybe you'll be the next lucky winner. And if you need some inspiration, just remember that Forrest Fenn's only goal was to give people some hope. So why not give it a shot and see what you can find? Who knows, maybe you'll become a millionaire too.
How about playing golf? Not on Earth, but on the moon. Let's journey back to a time 50 years ago when one astronaut turned the lunar surface into the most unusual golf course ever. Any golfer will tell you how tricky it is to avoid sand traps, but picture Alan Shepard, a NASA astronaut dealing with an entire surface that feels like super fine powder. During the Apollo 14 mission, he took a break to showcase some spacey golf skills for everyone watching from Earth. After his first shot, he excitedly made another. For him, it seemed the ball went forever and ever. Let's dial back to reality for a moment. Thanks to the research by the United States Golf Association, or USGA, we've got some numbers. They found that Alan's first moon ball traveled 24 yards, and his second stretched for 40 yards. Now, how does that compare to the average golf shots back here? In regular gravity, one usually swings to about 216 yards. Just goes to show, while we've upgraded our golf game on Earth with tech and training, the moon's low-gravity playground is a different environment altogether. Now, let's give Alan some props. Moon golf? Not as simple as you might think. His club wasn't one from your local sports store. It was a makeshift one. A moon sample collector with a club head stuck to it. Add to that the bulky spacesuit he had on. Imagine trying to swing wearing an outfit that's as stiff as cardboard. With all that gear, Alan could only muster a one-handed swing. Care to have a similar experience? Well, you might not be able to play golf on the moon anytime soon, but you can give it a shot underwater. Some say the conditions are similar. Here's where it gets even more interesting. The USGA didn't just take Alan's word on where the balls landed. They wanted to investigate. For starters, they used ultra-clear footage of the Apollo 14 mission. They also used some sharp images from NASA's special moon camera, launched in 2009. Using this imagery, they mapped out the journey of those two golf balls. Alan loved his unique golf club so much, he wanted to bring it back home. No big deal, right? Well, you see, in those days, astronauts would leave behind unnecessary items to make space for moon rocks. But not this club. So during the 70s, this interstellar golf club found a new home at the USGA Museum in New Jersey. Unlike regular golf clubs, this one had a twist. It was crafted from aluminum and Teflon, It was built to fold and fit snugly within the tight spaces of the lunar lander. How did this whole moon golf idea even pop up? Well, in 1970, golf legend Bob Hope paid a visit to NASA. Inspired by Hope's love for golf, an idea came into Shepard's head: moon golf. To turn his dream into reality, he collaborated with a golf professional and NASA's tech specialists. Together, they crafted a club that met NASA's strict safety norms. But hey, Alan didn't want this to be just a surprise stunt. Remember, traveling to the moon required very strict protocols. They couldn't just randomly have a picnic up there, you know? So, Alan made sure NASA officials agreed with this impromptu game of golf. They were initially skeptical, but eventually gave the green light after Alan passionately laid out his plan. He also promised he'd start playing if everything went smoothly on the mission. Determined to make it perfect, Alan prepped like a champ. The story goes that he'd put on his hefty spacesuit and sneak off to secret spots so he could practice. Decades later, he'd still be reflecting on his lunar escapade. He was the only golfer to ever swing on the moon. It's not just golf balls that astronauts left behind on their trips. There were actually a lot of objects left on the moon between 1969 and 1972, the year of the last moon landing. Each time you gaze up at the moon, remember that there's a cute family photo up there, some huge science gadgets, a small statue, a bunch of, well, human waste bags, and yes, some American flags. Years have passed by, and yes, technically those items are still hanging out there, though they've probably seen better days because of the harsh conditions on the moon. Some items had a special place in the astronauts' hearts and were meant to stay on the moon. But hey, leaving some stuff behind also meant they could bring back moon samples. You know the feeling. It's like when you need to make room in your suitcase for souvenirs when you're finishing a vacation. Does NASA have a complete list of things they left on the moon? Well, not really. In fact, one team tried to create a record of some of the items and reached an amazing list of 106 left there from the Apollo 11 mission alone. And that's not counting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin's famous footprints. The largest items at each landing site were mostly the sciencey stuff, like pieces of their lunar module and experiments to study the moon in depth. Then there were some beautiful tokens, like Apollo 11's plaque and a special disc with messages from leaders around the world. Some say the astronauts also took medals to remember some heroic cosmonauts, and they even left a gold olive branch, an age-old symbol of peace. Now, later moon missions had a little more fun, like Alan Shepard did with his golf game. But the award for the most heartwarming moment goes to Charlie Duke. During the Apollo 16 mission, he left a picture of his family up there. It's like he wanted them to be a part of the adventure. Although, a heads up, those photos probably didn't age well because of the moon's high exposure to the sun's radiation. There might just be an art museum up there on our satellite too. Let me explain. There's this tiny little art piece called the Moon Museum. It's a ceramic chip about the size of your nail, and it was crafted by an artist named Forrest Myers. This tiny object showcases miniature artworks from 6 talented people. Among them are even the famous Andy Warhol, the same artist known for his iconic soup cans and celebrity portraits. Forrest Myers said he wanted his mini museum to be on the moon, but there was a problem. NASA officials weren't exactly on board with the idea. However, Myers shared with the press that he handed over this art chip to an engineer working on the Apollo 12 mission. According to Myers, this engineer secretly tucked the Moon Museum onto a leg of the lunar lander. In case you haven't figured it out yet, these lunar landers don't come back to Earth after their mission. Take this with a grain of salt though, as NASA has never confirmed this story. You might wonder, why did they leave all these things? Sometimes it was about making a statement. Other times, it was purely practical. At one point, it was mentioned that during the Apollo 11 mission, for example, a decision needed to be made. The astronauts had to quickly figure out what was essential for their trip back home. They ended up creating a cleanup spot, tossing away things they didn't need anymore. Leaving things behind on the moon isn't that different from how we leave things behind on Earth, just like archaeologists study our ancient leftovers to learn about our ancestors. The stuff on the moon gives us insights about those incredible lunar missions. Some things they left had done their job, like the pole for the flag or the camera they used to broadcast those steps on the moon. Even the tools astronauts used to collect samples were left because they had more precious cargo to bring back: moon rocks. When it comes to the current state of all these items, scientists are not entirely sure. We do know that NASA's Moon Observer has spotted some of their shadows. They're still up there. The official gear was built to resist, so it might behave a bit better. But those personal items? They've probably seen better days.
Do you know the feeling when you've been trying to solve one mystery for your entire life? Nope? Well, Detective Anderson does. During almost 30 years of working for the police, he solved many riddles, caught hundreds of robbers, and helped save thousands of lives. There's a huge number of successfully solved cases on his record. At the age of 25, he caught a thief who changed his own face with plastic surgery once a year. When Anderson was 30, prisoners started breaking from jails all over the world. The detective successfully solved this case. At the age of 38, he discovered the secret base of a forbidden order in a volcano's mouth. By his 50s, he managed to explain all the most inexplicable things in the world. But there was something he couldn't solve. These were two mysteries from the 50s, cases of missing planes. All these years, Anderson has been scrolling through the details of this puzzle. Unfortunately, he was too young when this story began. All he had were guesses and notes. But today, a sudden thought struck him. For the first time in many years, he felt that he could finally solve this mystery. But to do this, he had to immerse himself in this story again. So he opened the closet and pulled out two old magazines with detailed articles about these incidents. The first one happened in the summer of 1955. July 1st, Pan Am Flight 914 was about to depart from New York Airport with 61 people on board. The plane model was a Douglas DC-4. It differed from modern aircraft, having giant propellers instead of turbines. So, all passengers fastened their seatbelts. The plane started taxiing down the runway, sped up, and took off. It went high into the sky and out of sight. Its destination was Florida. The flight time would be 3 hours. Dispatching services were watching the plane on their radar when suddenly, Pan Am 914 disappeared. The operator tried to contact the pilot, but received no response. New York reported this to Florida. They said they couldn't see the plane either. Usually, pilots notify via radio if a plane crashes or gets into a storm. But this time, just nothing. After several unsuccessful attempts to establish the connection, they deployed large-scale search operations. Communication with the plane was interrupted when it was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, the air company had to admit the aircraft crashed into the water. But this version had no proof. When planes fall that way, rescuers find floating debris. Some parts of the cabin or luggage always get to the surface. This time, rescuers found nothing. The plane didn't transmit any distress signals and didn't leave any traces of the crash. It seemed like it just disappeared into thin air. People forgot about this disaster for 37 years. And then, something bizarre happened. 1992, Venezuela, Caracas Airport. The control tower received a signal about an unknown aircraft approaching them. It was weird because it wasn't supposed to be there. There were no flights scheduled for that time. The plane was landing. The dispatcher and the rest of the airport staff understood that something was wrong here. The plane looked old, with huge propellers instead of turbines. After landing, the pilot contacted the airport.
Where are we?
The dispatcher asked him to identify himself. A few seconds later, he received an answer.
We are Pan Am Flight 914, departed from New York to Florida, with a crew of 4 people and 57 passengers on board.
The dispatcher didn't know what to do next. He and the airport staff understood what kind of plane they were looking at. What was this plane doing 37 years later, and almost 1,240 miles away from its destination? After a few seconds, the startled dispatcher turned on the microphone and said,
It is September 9th, 1992. You know that?
A long pause followed. Then, the pilot responded in a panic.
Oh no. Jimmy, where are we? No! Stay away! Let's go now!
The airport staff saw the pilot waving his hands in horror through the glass. Then, he started the engines and took the plane to the runway. Pan Am 914 increased its speed and took off. The dispatcher tried to stop him, but the pilot didn't respond. The plane disappeared into the sky, and no one else had heard of it since that day. Detective Anderson finished reading the article. He frowned and looked out the window. Raindrops were hitting the glass. The storm outside perfectly depicted what was happening in his mind at that moment. He seemed to know what had happened to that plane. All the clues were there, lying right in front of his eyes. But to know for sure, Anderson had to move on to the next case. It was another article, dated 1989. It happened in 1954. Santiago Airlines Flight 513 took off from West Germany Airport. The plane was due to land in Brazil in 18 hours. There were 88 passengers and 4 crew members on board. The plane hid behind the clouds and disappeared from all radar. Air traffic controllers were trying to contact the pilots, but didn't receive a response. 18 hours later, they called the airport in Brazil. Those dispatchers couldn't confirm this plane's landing and couldn't contact the pilots either. The search operation lasted for several months, but they found nothing. Just like in the Pan Am 914 case, the plane disappeared from radar while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. 2 years later, the search operation ended, and Santiago Airlines ceased its activities. October 12, 1989. Airport controllers in Brazil noticed a passenger plane that suddenly appeared on their radar. It didn't answer the airport staff's questions and just circled over the airbase. After a few minutes, the plane landed and nothing. No one opened the ramp. Passengers didn't get out. Pilots didn't respond. The aircraft was in perfect condition. One of the dispatchers realized that this was the missing Santiago Airlines Flight 513 that had been considered lost for 35 years. Airport staff approached the plane and opened the doors. What they saw there terrified them. The police, customs staff, doctors, detectives, and other airport staff members gathered around the plane. No one knew what to do next. There was no living person on board who could tell the truth. The plane disappeared in 1954 and appeared 35 years later in perfect condition without any damage. So far, no one has figured out what happened. Detective Anderson noticed the stories were very similar. Pan Am 914 disappeared in 1955. Santiago Airlines 513 vanished in 1954. The difference was almost a year. Anderson scratched his head and noticed another little detail. Both planes went missing from the radar the moment they were flying over the Atlantic Ocean. There are many myths about phantom ships and mysterious phenomena connected with the Bermuda Triangle. Detective Anderson knew these tales, but these 2 missing planes puzzled him. He looked at 2 articles and understood everything. Exactly. The solution was there, right in front of his eyes. Both stories were written in the same newspaper. There was no real dispatcher who communicated with the planes. Nothing was known about the passengers. No newspapers except this one published news about these missing aircraft. It seemed they just took the same story and changed the dates, locations, and names of flights. Yes, the case was solved. It was all fake. The rain stopped. Detective Anderson looked out the window and heard the sound of a passing train. He remembered another weird and fake story. A story about a phantom train. It took place in Italy in 1911. 100 passengers boarded the train of the Zanetti Railway Company. It went through the picturesque mountainous area, got into a mountain tunnel, and disappeared. No one else had seen the train since then. All the passengers were lost, but not for long. They appeared in the past. There were records dated 1845. One unknown doctor from Mexico City wrote about 100 Italians who appeared in the city from nowhere. They were all dressed strangely and talked about one mysterious train. This was a completely made-up story. There was no proof or records about this train and the people who got into the past. A loud sound interrupted his thoughts. Detective Anderson picked up the phone. He was silently listening to the person on the other end of the line. A minute later, he answered, "Yes." The detective put the phone down. It was a new mystery for him. In the Sahara Desert, the locals noticed a huge ship lost in the South Pacific 27 years ago. There was no crew on board, no cargo, and no flags. No one knew how it appeared among the sand, but wet mud formed around it because of moisture. It seemed like the ship had just teleported there from the water. Perfect! No fakes this time. Detective Anderson put on his hat and left the office. But this story is for another video.
How long does it normally take for a package to get to you? A day? A week? A month? How about over 3 years? Well, something like that happened in India not too long ago. At first glance, it doesn't seem all that surprising. Packages get delayed or even lost along the way all the time. That's just the nature of parcel delivery. But this wasn't some standard package. It was an entire train carriage loaded with tons of compost. Something this massive couldn't have just disappeared and then come back. Or could it? Let's find out. And yes, along the way, we're going to learn some cool things about trains. It all started in 2014 when an Indian company ordered dozens of tons of compost. All the goods were stored in 21 wagons. The train left the city of Visakhapatnam on November the 10th. Its destination was in Basti district, Uttar Pradesh, 870 miles away. So, the train left the station and the trip went smoothly. A few days later, the buyer accepted the goods. 20 wagons arrived in excellent condition, but one carriage, number 107462, was missing. Where could this wagon packed full of fertilizer have gone? Did someone steal the cargo? Did it get lost along the way? The buyer asked the company that sold them the compost to find the missing part of the shipment. The employees checked the documents and confirmed that the train of 21 carriages left the station on November the 10th. Several people from the rail station saw it. Then the train passed through some settlements and lost one carriage. But how? The buyer contacted the railway services but didn't receive any response. It seemed the train car had just disappeared. The documents indicated that all the paid goods went to the destination, which meant the buyer wouldn't get their money back. So they just lost more than $10,000. Months and years had passed, the incident eventually forgotten. But then, on July 25th, 2018, railway workers discovered an old carriage with the number 107462 on it at the station in Basti district, the original destination point. The company contacted the seller about their discovery, but they refused to accept the goods because the fertilizer had rotted long ago. They waited for the owner to come for it, but no one came, and no one reported it missing. So they towed the abandoned train car back to Basti district a few months later. By that time, the buyer had already reported the rail company about the lost compost, and they had already stopped searching for it, while the car was practically right under their noses. To this day, no one knows why the car was disconnected or where it's been all this time. You know where this would have never happened? Japan. There, you can ride the most punctual trains in the world. They arrive at all stations to the minute. All the locals know the trains are never late, so they can never use that excuse on their boss. But if something does happen to cause the train to arrive late, passengers receive a special ticket from the rail company that they can use as proof to protect them from their boss's accusations. Japan has not only the most punctual trains in the world, but also the fastest. I'm talking about maglev trains that can reach speeds up to 374 miles per hour. To give you an idea of how fast that is, the fastest recorded speed set by a Formula 1 car is 231.4 miles per hour. Not even close to the maglev train just traveling down its normal route. What's more, even if it travels at top speed, you can comfortably sit in your seat and drink tea on the train. You won't feel any vibrations or hear the sound of the wheels because it has no wheels at all. Maglev is short for magnetic levitation. Using the power of magnets, the train is basically suspended, floating just above the railway, meaning they don't actually touch, meaning there's next to no friction. This is what allows maglev trains to reach and then maintain such incredible speeds. Wouldn't it be cool to have such trains in every city? I mean, forget about traffic jams, am I right? But unfortunately, they're not so popular around the world. Charging the train's magnets requires a lot of energy, they heat up to incredibly high temperatures during the trip, and then they need to cool down after. And this also requires a lot of incredibly expensive infrastructure. For many countries, such trains would be simply economically unviable. For now. That carriage in India would probably have been standing at the railway station forever if someone hadn't noticed it. But what if it was a whole train with, let's say, 100 cars? I mean, what do people do with old train cars? Usually they would put old trains in landfills, dismantle them for scrap, dispose of them with pressure compacting, or melt them down. But the most popular practice is to load the bare hulls of wagons onto a big ship and then throw them in the ocean. It's not as wasteful as you think. The trains actually provide a great frame for corals and plant life to grow on them. And soon these overgrown train carriages become homes for fish and other ocean inhabitants. This is how the people in New York decided to get rid of their old trains. From 2001 to 2010, they sank more than 2,000 cars this way. And soon, these trains became artificial reefs. They got completely covered by corals and algae, and shells, crabs, sea sponges, mackerels, perches, and sea turtles settled in each car. Underwater photographers and divers filmed those wagons and even saw dolphins swimming through them. It's like an underwater city where the trains are free real estate for the fish. So, people provided modern housing for the fish and saved about $30 million on recycling. I mean, I use the term modern very loosely. They look more like phantom trains. But you know what the coolest thing about phantom trains is? They actually exist. And you know what's even cooler? You can get in and ride one. You can find such trains in England, in small towns like Sneyd. Now, imagine you stepped onto the empty train station there. It looks decrepit and abandoned. There's no parking, no ticket machines, no shops. And now you hear the sounds of a train arriving at the station. It seems normal enough, but when you step inside, you'll probably feel some discomfort since you're the only passenger on this phantom train. You can walk from the first carriage to the last one if you like. No one will stop you. You can actually choose from several similar trains. Yeah, there's a lot of them moving all around England. They're left running through abandoned railways because it actually works out economically for the country. To cancel these phantom train routes, you'd need to go through many bureaucratic procedures and spend taxpayers' money. And there's no need to do all of that if the trains just go and don't bother anyone. Also, they attract many tourists and enthusiasts who love to visit abandoned stations. If you're interested, you should know that it's not so easy to find these routes. You need to carefully study train schedules on the internet, since not even all the railway workers know about them. In some remote places, the trains arrive only once every few days. But what about real phantom trains? There are many stories about trains that have mysteriously disappeared throughout the years. The most popular one is the legend of the Zanetti Train Company. Several wagons disappeared with dozens of passengers in a mountain tunnel in Italy in 1911, and then popped up out of the blue in 1845 in Mexico? But of course, there's no evidence for this story. Someone just wrote it in a newspaper and everyone believed it. The same thing happens with planes and ships that supposedly travel through time. Although it's much more common for sailing vessels to become abandoned and then left to sail aimlessly on the seas for decades. There's much more documented evidence of that. But if you really saw a mysterious train arriving at an old railway through the fog in the middle of the night, would you step inside?
A lot of weird incidents have happened in the mysterious valley of Harzhu ever since the 1950s. People even started comparing it to the infamous Bermuda Triangle. But are they really that similar? It all started when an airplane went missing here under circumstances no one can explain yet. They searched the location back and forth, but nothing appeared to have remained of the aircraft. And guess what? No one received any SOS messages from the team on board. And to top it off, the same year, a considerable number of tourists and local residents were lost here in the valley, never to be seen again. Speaking of the Bermuda Triangle, one can link its origin story to a series of mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft, like the one that happened in 1945, when 5 planes and 14 people on board went missing in this location while doing routine training exercises. Even a thorough investigation didn't help to establish the cause of the incident. But that wasn't the end. Between 1945 and the mid-1980s, another 25 small planes went missing while going through the Bermuda Triangle, never to be seen again. And the search parties haven't recovered a single piece of these aircraft. The Bermuda Triangle isn't the only stretch of water that has claimed ships for good. In the Pacific Ocean, near Japan, there's a tricky portion of water that has earned the nickname the Devil's Sea. The best known out of all of these disappearances is that of a fishery patrol vessel that went missing in 1953. On board were 31 crew members and scientists who were looking to investigate a recently formed volcanic island. What happened to the ship and all the people on board? We'll never know, I guess, since they never found the ship or the crew members, and there was literally no trace of them left behind. Back in 1911, a standard train was scheduled to depart from a railway station in Rome, hoping to reach the city of Milan. Needless to say, none of the 106 passengers ever made it to the destination, and no one has ever seen them again. What happened to these people and to their train? Were they really lost forever? Some people seem to believe this isn't the case. As it was completing its journey, the train was supposed to pass through a long tunnel. It did enter it, but never came out the other end of the tunnel. Nothing was left of the train, and it seemed like it literally just vanished into thin air. Only 2 of the passengers were found, but they were quite unwell at the time, and their stories did not seem to make much sense. They spoke of a dense fog that they simply jumped out of because they got so scared. 15 years later, a story spread about a group of 104 Italian people that popped up in Mexico City, claiming they had arrived by train from Rome. If that's not weird enough, the story appears to have been reported back in 1845, 66 years before the train even departed in the first place. Of course, nobody at the time actually took these people seriously, but you can't help but wonder, did they actually time travel via the Roman tunnel, or is it just another urban myth? What do you think? The Lost Colony is the story of a strange phenomenon that happened back in the late 1500s. A group of people from England had moved into a colony on Roanoke Island off the coast of present-day North Carolina. But they soon realized they didn't have enough supplies. To fix this, the colony's governor decided to head back to England to get some. He didn't manage to come back for another 3 years. When he finally did, he was astonished at what was left behind. Nothing. The entire population of the colony was gone. The only reminder of what had been there was a single word carved into a tree. To this day, nobody knows what might have happened to these people or what the carved word means. A lighthouse without an operator? You might think that can't possibly be true, but hear me out. Located in the northwestern part of Scotland are the Flannan Isles. There's nothing fancy about them since they're nothing more than a bunch of rocks and grass. But there is a famous lighthouse here hiding a dark secret. In 1900, all 3 of the lighthouse's keepers mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again. Ever since, the islands have been completely abandoned. The lighthouse became one of those with an automated system in the 1970s. No list of places where things go missing could be complete without this mysterious forest located in Transylvania, a region in Romania. And no, it has nothing to do with the famous Count Dracula, if that's what you're thinking. It's called the Hoya Forest, and it's a place that has seen quite its share of unusual phenomena. Not only do people go missing here, but others have experienced all sorts of weird noises, from female voices to whispers. Some people claim to have time traveled between the spooky trees of the Hoya forest. They say they had literally skipped a few hours before they went back. The Yellowhead Highway is a stretch of road located in British Columbia, Canada. One section of the road has received a lot of attention throughout the years, starting with the 1960s because of some mysterious disappearances. These events have earned it the nickname Highway of Tears. There is no reasonable explanation as to why people keep going missing here. What is more striking is that most of these people were young women. This triangular area that stretches above the desert and the Sierra Nevada mountains in the state of Nevada received quite a bit of attention because of a disappearance that happened back in 2007. A record-setting sailor, aviator, and adventurer named Steve Fawcett flew here in a small plane and then disappeared. They searched for Fawcett intensively for months, but didn't find any traces of him or the aircraft. 1 year later, the mystery of Fawcett's fate was finally solved when a hiker came across his ID cards, and later a search party found the plane's wreckage. It's one of the most visited natural resorts in the world, but Yosemite National Park carries some dark secrets of its own. Despite its beauty and abundance of wildlife, a total of 45 people went missing right here in this location. No one knows what happened to them. Hey, maybe we should ask the local bears. They might know something. There are even stories of people that disappeared from one region of the park only to pop up in a completely different location. This hasn't stopped over 3 million people that visit the park each year from wandering around this location, though. Whenever a ship happens to sink, you'd expect to at least find pieces of it on the bottom of the sea, right? Well, not if you're traveling through Lake Superior. It's located along the border of the United States and Canada, and became famous because of the great number of ships that went missing here. It may have something to do with the stormy winds, of course, but that doesn't explain why some ships simply vanish altogether, without a single piece of them ever to be found, not even at the bottom of the lake. It does gather a lot of tourists each year, though. They come here to scuba dive and see the remains of some of the ships that still lie here. The bottom of this lake even contains what's left of the notorious SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Back when it departed on June 7, 1958, it was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes and, to this day, remains the largest ship ever to have sunk in the area. Similar to other events, the exact cause of the shipwreck remains a mystery.
No matter what happens, don't stop! We almost got it! 2 treasure seekers are digging frozen ground in a cornfield at night. It's raining hard, lightning is flashing, but these 2 guys keep working. And now the shovel hits something solid. No way! A treasure chest! They start digging faster and find a piece of a ship's engine. What the? Far from the seas and lakes, somewhere under the fields of Kansas City, they found a giant sunken ship. How is this possible? Now you'll see. Some people spend their lives searching for shipwrecks with treasures underground. One of them is explorer David Hawley. He's been looking for such ships far from the seas, rivers, and oceans for many years. He does this because he likes the feeling of adventure. The holds of these ships may contain chests of gold, antiques, and artifacts. And you can get a lot of money for them. David says you don't have to go into the ocean to find a sunken ship. They may be lying in your backyard. But why do ships end up buried underground among fields, farms, and plains? Let's find out using the example of steamboat Great White Arabia. According to old records, the newspaper clippings, this ship had been carrying about 200 tons of treasure before it sank in 1856. Many rumors and local legends said the ship was lying underground, a few miles northeast of Kansas City. It was there because people deliberately altered the riverbed and channels of the Missouri River in the second half of the 19th century. They artificially brought the shores closer to each other. They narrowed the river to increase the flow's speed, so boats could sail much faster. In the 19th century, steamboats were the most popular means of transporting passengers and goods. Before railroads, they extended the western border across the Mississippi and Missouri rivers and brought supplies to people. That's why it was so important to increase the speed of their movement. So, on September 5, 1856, Arabia was sailing along such an estuary. It came across a snag sticking out of the water. A piece of log quickly flooded the ship. Fortunately, all passengers were evacuated. But the steamer and its precious cargo reached the silt bottom of the Missouri River in a few minutes. Several years had passed. Everyone forgot about the vessel. During this time, the course of the Missouri River had changed. But Arabia remained under the wet, muddy bottom. The soil level above it was getting higher, and the ground was losing moisture. Eventually, many decades later, a cornfield formed above the sunken ship. In the 1980s, one farmer owned this area, and he had no idea what was hidden in his territory. David Hawley carefully studied the history of the sunken ships of the USA. He knew that hundreds of steamers had gone underwater all over Missouri, but most of all, he was interested in Arabia, as there were rumors that it was filled with gold and other valuable things. The territory of cornfields in Kansas was vast, but David Hawley knew how to search properly. In 1987, he started working. First, together with his brother and father, they collected all the clippings from old newspapers they could find. They were looking not only for information about the steamer, but also for maps of the Missouri River. They tracked its historical changes, checked the dates, and identified a large area where the steamer sank. Next, they used electromagnetic testing and other geological stuff to study the soil and find the right place. They searched for differences in ground moisture and density. Then, they went through the territory with powerful metal detectors. And so, by the fall of 1988, they had determined the location of the steamer. Arabia was the size of a football field. This gigantic vessel lay 45 feet underground, 4 stories down. But before they started excavating, they had to ask the owner of the cornfield for permission. For the farmer, this news was a big surprise. He agreed, on the condition that the excavations would be completed by spring so that he could sow a new crop. Digging a giant ship in winter is much more difficult and expensive than at other times. It includes additional equipment, electricity, and heating costs. The team worked day and night. They financed the excavations out of their own pocket. Each invested more than $10,000 and took out a bank loan. Finally, they noticed the first details of the ship. The shovels hit the huge engine boilers and the deck. The goal had been achieved. Most of the cargo lying inside the sunken ships is covered with rust, shells, mud, and is badly damaged. The contents of Arabia were in excellent condition, considering that the ship had sunk 130 years prior. Unfortunately, they didn't find the chests of gold. Still, they got several tons of other valuable cargo, household items of people who lived in the middle of the 19th century. It was a time capsule. The ship was carrying supplies for hundreds and thousands of people, and all these things were perfectly preserved. For example, they could clearly see the brand stamp Goodyear Rubber Company on one rubber shoe. The longer the excavations continued, the more things David and his team found. In the barrels, they found plates from the 19th century. They were intact and usable. Also, there were clean clothes, thousands of pairs of shoes, harpoons, frying pans, and umbrellas. The ship was carrying cargo to supply about 16 small towns. Yes, it's not gold, but such artifacts are also precious. The contents of the ship could be worth millions. However, the crew wasn't going to sell these things. They made a museum on the site of a former fruit market in Kansas City. If you go there, you will immediately feel like you're in a department store of the 19th century. There are thousands of items in good condition. Even the matches here are dry enough to light up. It took David many years to present the entire collection from the steamship. He values each of the items and doesn't want to sell them. Anyone can come here, pay for a ticket, and find themselves in the past. Who knows, maybe there's an old ship hidden in your backyard too. Geologists found an older vessel in the hot desert of Namibia in 2008. This ship sailed back in the days when pirates scared sailors on the seas, and now it's inside a dried-up lagoon. The ship sailed from Lisbon in 1533 and disappeared with the crew near a small diamond mining town. After almost 500 years, the hull had been badly damaged. Only the carcass of the ship remained, but the treasure hidden inside the vessel stayed intact. They carefully studied the boat for a long time, trying not to ruin anything. And then, 5 days later, they found a big old chest in the hold. Carefully opening it, they found gold coins there. Thus, the cost of the ship was estimated at about $10 million. The exact cause of the shipwreck is unknown, but experts believe the ship was destroyed by heavy cargo and bad weather. It went to the bottom of a lagoon that later became a desert. Some find an airplane in their backyard, others discover a ship, and one man found a passage to an ancient secret city in his house. This happened in Turkey in 1963. The owners of the building decided to make repairs. He went to his basement and knocked down the wall to turn this place into a living room. And so, behind one wall, he found a tunnel leading underground. The man thought it was some kind of a secret chamber. He went down there and realized it was something much more than that. It was an ancient city 18 floors deep. People built it in the years 780 to 1180 as a refuge from weather disasters and the invasion of enemies. This place also includes many underground tunnels that stretch for several miles in different directions. People could get to the town from different points using secret passages leading to these roads. The city can accommodate about 20,000 residents, livestock, and tons of food supplies. Archaeologists have also found a chapel, schools, stables, and public kitchens there.
There's a ship drifting somewhere in the ocean without a crew. The last time someone saw it was over 50 years ago. Its story reminds of that of the Flying Dutchman, a ship that's bound to sail forever and bring disaster to whoever sees it at sea. At least the legend says so. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, the SS Bay Chimo was definitely real and built for a German company in Hamburg and began as an ordinary cargo ship. It was trading supplies between Hamburg and Sweden in the Baltic Sea starting from 1914. It had a strong steam engine and a hull made of steel. A few years later, it became British property. Then, in the 1920s, a Canadian company purchased it for around $18,000, a huge amount of money back then. The new owner, the Hudson's Bay Company, was actively using the ship for several years. They would often send it on voyages from its home port in Scotland to Siberia, Alaska, the Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. It also passed through the Panama Canal and even the Suez Canal, with fur pelts for sale on board. Sometimes it would also transport passengers. It had completed 9 successful voyages before this strip of good luck came to an end. Starting from the 1930s, SS Bay Chimo would have trouble with ice and storms. When it first got trapped in ice in October of 1931, some of the crew managed to escape to Alaska. 15 of 22 sailors decided to stay with their vessel and try to save it. They had furs and other valuable cargo worth around $58,000 aboard. The company sent them supplies to survive the winter. They set camp near the ship out of the hatches, tarpaulins, and other materials, and offloaded the cargo. At the end of November, a blizzard rushed through the area, and it seemed like it had taken the ship with it. The ice platform had survived, but the ship broke free. Some of the crew members were sure it had sunk. But soon after, they heard from one of the locals who had spotted their ship around 45 miles away from their camp. The crew moved on with their lives, and the ship started its journey as a runaway vessel. People would spot SS Bay Chimo once a year or so, all the way until 1965. It was mostly spotted off the coast of Alaska. A man going to Nome with his sled dog, along with prospectors, explorers, and treasure hunters, all claimed to have seen SS Bay Chimo. Someone tried to board it and take it to port, but ended up stranded on it for days because of horrible weather. Others got luckier and managed to take a whaleboat, some furniture, and other valuables from the vessel. Those who got close to the ship saw that it was damaged and missing the propeller. Still, it stayed afloat without a crew for at least 38 years and became the longest sailing ghost ship in history. In 2006, the Alaskan authorities started a project to solve the mystery of this ghost ship of the Arctic and finally find SS Beichimo, either still above or below the water. So far, the project has not been a success. SS Beichimo remains one of the estimated 4,000 ships that have disappeared off Alaskan shores. If the legend of the 17th century isn't lying, this ghost ship could be sailing somewhere along the Flying Dutchman. It belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Its captain managed to do the impossible for that time and sailed from Holland to Indonesia in only 3 months. They said he was flying over the sea, and some evil tongues explained that he had made a deal with evil forces to achieve that. Once the ship was sailing back home, its captain and crew disappeared without a trace. There are many versions of what happened to it. One of the first ones said it had tried to enter port at the Cape of Good Hope, got in a terrible storm, and sank as there was no captain to save it. Another legend says the captain had refused to obey the skies to let the ship sink during the storm. A scary life form then struck the boat and the crew, and it was condemned to forever wander without rest. Many sailors claim to have spotted the Wandering Dutchman. The Duke of York, who is to become King of England, mentioned having seen it in Australian waters. Right after spotting the ship, the man who saw it first fell from the top of the mast and didn't survive. There were more encounters with this legendary ship up to the middle of the 20th century. Ships would nearly collide with it as the Flying Dutchman jumped out of the blue. Scientists have a more logical explanation for this mystery: Fata Morgana, not to be confused with Hakuna Matata. Now, when you're out at sea on a hot day and the air is all wavy, it feels like when you look at the road on a scorching summer day. That's because of something called atmospheric refraction. When light passes through different layers of air with different temperatures and densities, it bends and twists. Sometimes, under certain conditions,